Welcome, everybody. Call the meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we have roll call, please. Dr. Potensky.
Matthew Patinsky.
Karen Warner. Amy Carney.
Mike Sharkey.
And Donna Lewis. All right, we're going to move to approve the agenda, but I would like to note that I know we have a couple of items to pull. We'll be pulling 7L, and I think, Ms. Carney, did you have one that you wanted to pull?
7L was the one I had asked, or said that I was going to pull. Thank you.
7O?
7L was the
L.
one.
Oh, you wanted to pull it, 7L. Okay. Are there any other consent agenda items we want to pull? Okay, I would also ask, before we approve the agenda, I'm going to move, for the sake of a few people in our audience, that we move the consent agenda item, except for 7L, to go before discussion items, so that'll honor people's time. And then after discussion items, we'll address the item we pulled, 7L. All those I need a second on the motion?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Dr. Menzel, student and staff recognitions. Do we need a medium decorum? Yes, we do. Citizens attending and/or participating in Scottsdale Unified School District meetings, either in person, virtually, or telephonically, are required to observe the same rules in order and decorum applicable to members of the governing board and staff. Unauthorized remarks or demonstrations from members of the audience, yells, outbursts, and other disruptions are not permitted. Thank you. Dr. Menzel.
Well, good evening, President Lewis, Vice President Sharkey, and members of the governing board, and a warm welcome to our staff and community members who are here with us this evening. As we head into the second to last month of the 24-25 school year, we're finding out nearly daily about different awards and recognitions coming our students' way as a result of the hard work they've been putting in since back in August. So to start things off tonight, I want to tell you about 3 recent events in which our students were celebrated. One you know about, the other 2 you may not. The first is the annual Heard Museum American Indian Youth Art Show and Sale that is part of the prestigious Phoenix Museum's annual Indian Fair and Market. The event was held the first weekend of March, and I'm proud to report that 2 Native American students from Coronado High School, Maya Yellow Eyes and Juliana Sanchez, submitted entries to the competition. If you look at the screen, that's Maya on the left with her painting, Orange Day. Juliana is on the right with her sculpture, Cold Alone, but a companion brings you home. I'm not sure you can make it out, but it depicts footprints of a wolf or a large dog, and I'm just guessing, based on the title, about it being cold, that the white medium represents snow. Juliana's piece received 3rd place recognition at the art show, and both pieces were sold. We want to congratulate both students on their success. Sticking with the art theme, the Schemmer Art Center, located near Phoenix-Scottsdale border on Camelback Road, hosts an annual art exhibition of high school art called New Horizons. With the guidance and encouragement of art teachers, and please forgive me if I mispronounce any of the names, Sierra Riccio and Eric Johanni at Arcadia High School, Carson Bilger at Chaparral High School, Elena Wittenstein at Coronado High School, and Marie McCarty at Saguaro High School. Arcadia students Frida Tripke Hughes and Nick Adams, Chaparral student Mia Hawley and Emily Meyer, Coronado student Harvin Osif, and Saguaro students Brian Stevenson and Jesse Cram produced these wonderful pieces and won awards and some money in the 2025 New Horizons competition. So we're very proud of the demonstration of talent of our art students. And then the third one, which I believe people know about, was the SUSD Family Arts Fest, the 3rd annual that was celebrated 2 weeks ago at ASU Sky Song Innovation Center. It was a fabulous 2 days of onstage performances by SUSD choirs, orchestras, and bands, as well as visually overwhelming display of student art that you will ever see in one place. I always enjoy the opportunity to give, it used to be a Superintendent's Choice Award, and it still is, but it's one of those things where I'm the last judge, and so it's fun to be able to identify different art pieces at every school to recognize, and I hope that in the future, more people will take advantage of the opportunity to see our student on display. and student talent on display. In particular, when you look at the progression from elementary to middle to high school and how sophisticated they become in displaying their artistic abilities, it's pretty fantastic. And it's certainly something that I can't do. We also want to acknowledge that it doesn't happen alone. It's a partnership with Scottsdale Arts. We're truly grateful for them. Arizona State University, the City of Scottsdale, Scottsdale Community Partners, and its Ali Ortega Empty Bowls program, Entertainment Solutions, and the Coppola Cheney Group of Lee and Associates that make this such an amazing celebration of SUSD's fine and performing arts programs. As you well know, SUSD offers students plenty of other opportunities to develop their skills and talents in academic areas other than the arts. Our Director of Teaching and Learning, Dr. Kim Dodds-Karen, is here to introduce you to some Saguaro High School students whose SaberCat experience will once again take them to the global robotics stage in Houston, Texas in a few weeks. Dr. Dodds-Karen.
There we go. We'll try that again. Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Menzel. Good evening, President Lewis, Vice President Sharkey, governing board members, and those of you present this evening. As a Cognia STEM certified school and home of the Scottsdale Math and Science Academy, I would like to introduce you to members of Saguaro's SaberCat Robotics team. So if Fiona Riley, Gian Raboyne, Corbin Gugisberg, Noah Rotham, and Marco Bartoletti would join me. Thank you. Governing board members, Dr. Menzel, and audience, please meet Team 4146. They will represent SUSD in the first robotics, are you ready for this? World Championship in Houston, Texas on April 16th. They will be in Texas April 16th through the 19th. This international event closes out the competitive high school robotics season and draws hundreds of student teams from around the globe in an annual celebration of science, technology, engineering, and math known as STEM. The SaberCat Robotics team, it's a longtime staple of Saguaro High School and the amazing STEM curriculum. This year, the team has qualified for the World Championship by bringing home the Engineering Inspiration Award from the Arizona North Regional Competition in Flagstaff that took place during spring break. UC Robotics tournaments are not just about the robots who shoots the most baskets or deposits the most cubes. It's also about the team and the sportsmanship, the advancing respect and appreciation for engineering, not only within a school, but within a community, inspiring others to pursue learning in science and technology. You will see members of our SaberCat Robotics team all over their learning community at our elementary schools, in our middle schools, and even hosting the regional qualifying tournament for the first LEGO League robotic competition in every December. Team 4146 followed up its Flagstaff performance the following week by winning the Creativity Award at the Arizona East Regional Competition held at Corona del Sol High School in Tempe. The Creativity Award celebrates the creativity that enhances the strategy of play and was intentionally designed and not discovered. The judges were impressed with the unique shape of the robot and of the tall sideboard, which we're told offered a functional advantage on the field of play. Is that true? Mm-hmm. So as these students prepare for the big trip to Texas in a few weeks, we want to wish them the best of luck and wishes for an amazing performance. Before I give them their challenge coins, we want to invite Fiona to the podium. You've met her before through Student Advisory Board, but she's here to share a few words with you.
Good evening, members of the board, Dr. Menzel. So this year, the SaberCats were able to accomplish something pretty impressive. We were able to continue all of our STEM initiatives, so that's Sisters in STEM, Melody Makers, Go Baby Go, and FLL, while also designing this robot with a much smaller team than last year. At North, we were lucky enough to win Engineering Inspirations, and the week after, we won the Creativity Award, and this was all because of the help of our teachers, Ms. Lindberg and Mr. Brandt, and because of all of our amazing mentors and the support of the SUSD Foundation and the people in the district. So we thank you, and we're very excited to go.
We have a bag of loot for you of challenge coins, but I do want to give them out individually to you, but also for your teachers, Mrs. Lindberg and Mr. Brandt. Thank you, Governing Board.
Congratulations, and we wish you well as you go to Houston. Just a brief bit of history. It's because of the lobbying by Saguaro High School students several years ago that the robotics is a credit-bearing course in SUSD. So thank you and your predecessors for seeing the importance of this work and for carrying on the tradition. So we wish you well in your competitive endeavors. And that concludes the celebrations this evening.
All right, let's have superintendent comments.
Just a few items to point out. Today marks the first day of our annual testing season. We know this is something that is necessary, but not necessarily something that students look forward to. So students grades 3 through 8 are taking the essay assessment. We also are giving the AZ Science and ACT for high school students. We've got a modified schedule at the high school in order to accommodate that. We want our students to do their very best in demonstrating what they've learned. And in order to do that, we encourage getting good rest, eating healthy, staying hydrated, and I would suggest maybe not overstressing. Testing is important, but if you're too stressed, you might not remember the things that are important. So we wish our students well as they work to demonstrate the things they've been learning this school year. On April 4th, we'll be hosting a legislative visit to Tavon Elementary and Arcadia High School with the 4 new representatives and 1 senator, 3 new representatives and a senator. All 3 from LD8 are new, and then 1 from LD4. So we invited them to come and tour those 2 schools. It's a great opportunity for us to showcase amazing teaching and learning that is happening on those campuses, as well as to help our elected officials see the impact of the funding decisions they make at the Capitol. On Saturday, the Math and Science Academy at Saguaro will be holding its annual STEAM showcase. That will be from 12 to 2. If your schedule permits, I would absolutely encourage you to stop by. The student displays are truly impressive, and you've seen some of the students that were here tonight. They'll be there on Saturday as well, and I would encourage that. Finally, like every month, there are different celebrations that take place, and because this is the first meeting of the month, we want to first start by saying that tomorrow is Paraprofessional Appreciation Day. Do we have any paraprofessionals in the room with us? I want to say thank you on behalf of the district administration and board. Our paraprofessionals do truly amazing things in support of our students and their learning. And so tomorrow you have an opportunity. If you didn't know that it was Paraprofessional Day, tomorrow you have an opportunity to make sure that they feel truly appreciated in your buildings and at our various sites. This week also happens to be National Assistant Principals Week. And we do value our assistant principals. Any assistant principals in the room? All right, well, they're probably getting a good night's rest so they can be prepared for test administration tomorrow, but we appreciate our principals. National Library Week is April 7th through 13th. National Occupational Therapy Month and School Library Month are all month long, so we have an opportunity to be able to thank our people who work as occupational therapists or work in our school libraries. National Volunteer Week is April 20th through 26th. And Public School Volunteer Week is April 21st through 25th. Administrative Professionals Day, like Gladys and so many others, is April 23rd. So all of you who have administrative professionals, don't forget to honor and recognize them for all that they contribute. And then finally, National Student Leadership Week is the final week in April, April 24th through 30th. So many opportunities to celebrate all of the people who make SUSD special. With that, we conclude my report.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel. All right, we'll move into public comment. In compliance with open meeting law, the governing board may not discuss or take action tonight on any matters raised during public comments that are not on the agenda. However, the governing board members may respond to direct criticism, ask staff to review a matter, or that matter be placed on a future agenda. Public comments will be conducted in accordance with Board Policy BEDH. As a reminder, each speaker will have 2 minutes. The screen will indicate the time. Please be prepared to close your comments and relinquish the floor at the conclusion of your time. The board asks that each speaker please introduce yourself by stating your name and whether you live within our school district for clarity on the record. We thank you for your time and attendance here this evening and your cooperation in following the meeting decorum and protocols. We will read the names, or I will read the names of each of the speakers who have signed up. We have 10 tonight. When you hear your name, could you please come up to the podium and I will read the name of the next speaker to be ready on deck. Once you start speaking, your time will begin. And our first speaker tonight is Jeff Rattay. And that'll be followed by Pietrina Pinsabeni.
I was a substitute teacher in the Scottsdale schools for 13 years. A teacher at Arcadia High School filed a formal complaint with the district. She alleged that I'd refused to call girls by boys' names per her instructions. The students are transgender. Dr. Menzel's office solicited the students, without their parents' knowledge, to write letters indicating how traumatized they were by my actions. These letters were secretly placed in my personnel file and used to fire me as a teacher and coach. Despite the governing board's personnel policy and procedures manual, which says the following: material which concerns an employee's conduct, service, character, or personality will not be placed in a teacher's file unless he or she has had an opportunity to read such material. The teacher will acknowledge that he or she has read such material by affixing his or her signature to the actual copy to be filed. The appropriate district administrator will also initial, and a copy will be issued to the teacher. The teacher will have the right, etc. You get the idea here. More importantly, a federal judge issued the following order to every superintendent in the country: a school district cannot force a teacher to call girls by male names. Doing so would violate that teacher's First Amendment rights to freedom of speech, and there can be no free speech retaliation. In addition, the President of the United States issued an executive order protecting teachers from this alleged harassment of transgender students. Part of the problem is this clown law firm, Gus Rosenfeld, who have recommended the school board ignore federal judges, and besides, Mr. Atay missed the statute of limitations to sue a public entity. Dr. Menzel retaliated further when he published a newsletter that listed district separations from the past year. All said retired or resigned, with one exception. My name said terminated. He had maliciously destroyed my reputation despite 13 years as a substitute teacher, coach, and volunteer veteran presenter with the Joe Foss Institute. I am again requesting to be placed on next month's agenda, or let me speak to the board in executive session.
All right, thank you. Pietrina is next, and followed by Melanie Simons.
Hello, I'm Petrina Pensabani. I live in Fountain Hills. My children attend Anasazi Elementary School. I'm here tonight to implore the board to create an action item to vote to adjust the budget to include full-time assistant principals at all school sites. APs are the bridge between students, teachers, and administration. They help create a safe, structured, and positive learning environment. Whether handling student discipline, school safety initiatives, supporting teachers, or handling crisis, emergency, and dangerous situations, it is imperative that the APs have a full-time administrator role on every campus. SUSD is because kids. Well, prove it. Beyond logistics, assistant principals are mentors and they're problem solvers. They connect with families and students, guiding them through challenges and helping them reach their full potential. They facilitate testing, they coordinate 504 plans, they execute safety protocols, they support teachers by providing professional development and ensuring classrooms are places of growth and inspiration. Simply put, an assistant principal's impact extends far beyond their title. They shape the future, one day, one decision, and one student at a time. By implementing full-time assistant principals at all school sites, we strengthen leadership, improve student outcomes, and foster more effective learning environments. I urge you to vote in favor of adjusting the budget to make this critical investment in our schools. Dr. Menzel, you mentioned that this week is Assistant Principal Week. I hope that you all really look within and see how important these people are. They're not here for a paycheck, much like every other educator, right? They are here because they love our children. I'm here because kids, and I hope you're all here truly because kids. Thank you.
Thank you. Melanie Simons, followed by Mike Bingert.
Good evening. I am here today to discuss the volunteer policy with the Scottsdale Unified School District. My name is Melanie Simmons. I'm a parent of a child, and I do live within the boundaries of the district. I'm here basically because we have a child sex offender who has been volunteering at our schools. And the problem with that is the policy. We have parents and legal guardians who, according to the policy, may at times be out of sight of a certified staff member that are not required to undergo background checks to volunteer. And I'm asking that the board please look at that and change that policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Bengert, followed by Jennifer Liebeber.
Proponents of school-based mental health programs assert that social emotional theories of learning posit that by removing a student's psychological blockages, academic achievement will follow. That's the theory in a nutshell. But does it work? Independent researchers, particularly outside U.S. educational research circles, say no. But you don't need another study to show this. Look at the student proficiency scores according to the Auditor General's annual school district spending analysis report. SUSD's FY24 instructional spending was 54.4% compared to our peer group spending of 55.2%. Over the 5 years ending in FY24, instruction and instruction support spending is down 1.7%, while student support spending is up 2.6%. Per student administration spending is 15% higher than our peer group. During this period, enrollment has decreased by 8.4%. This 5-year period coincides with Dr. Menzel's tenure as superintendent. In the 2024 annual financial report, SUSD cut 59 instructional positions, added 71 student support positions, and added 44 support and administrative positions. So enrollment is down, instructional spending is down, student support services are up, and administrative spending per student is up. How has implementing the social emotional theories worked for SUSD? In FY24, 55% of students passed the state assessment for math, 61% passed ELA, and 41% passed science. This represents a 12% average drop from 2019. As the data shows, it's not working in SUSD. Academic performance does not improve with more spending on support services and less spending on academic instruction. The FY25-26 budget proposal continues this failed trend of cutting instructional positions and ignoring decreases in academic performance. Wake up, parents. Dr. Menzel needs to go.
Thank you, Mike. Jennifer Liebeber, followed by Mark Pfeiffer.
Good morning, afternoon, evening. It's been a long day.
First thing.
My name's Jennifer Liebhaber. I am a proud teacher at Kiva Elementary, a proud parent of a child who went to Sequoia, is at Cocoa Pond now, and will go to Chaparral next year as a freshman. I am also a proud member of the Scottsdale Education Association. I am here to read a story from one of my colleagues who was not comfortable sharing this story of her own. I am leaving teaching at the end of the year, and one of the reasons is that I can no longer afford to be a teacher with a young child. I use my husband's health insurance because if I used my own, my take-home pay would be lower than the cost of childcare and not worth me working. I have a master's degree and have been in this district since 2014, and some newer teachers only make a few thousand less than me. I cannot afford having a child, paying back my student loans, and maintaining my household. I also find it really insulting that on top of being paid only slightly more than newer teachers with a bachelor's degree, the district's solution to rising insurance premiums was to reduce the general raise to our base salary, which would have impacted me more positively because I cannot afford the school's insurance. I also find it really irritating that I cannot make use of the mobile mammography visits or flu shots because I don't have the district's insurance. The district claims to care about our well-being, but I am not seeing that reflected since certified staff and programs always seem to get cut first. Those are her words. They're not mine. I wanted to share them with you, but I would also like to mention that I encourage you to continue working to fund public education, not just in our local community, but statewide, national-wide. I know one of your agenda items today has to do with lobbyists and lobbying. I think it's really important that we attack the problem of funding at all levels. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Mark Pfeiffer, followed by Mark Ginsburg.
Good evening. I'm Mark Pfeiffer, science teacher and athletic director at Mojave Middle School. I'm also the secretary of the Scottsdale Education Association. As the deadline for contract acceptances draws near, I find myself reflecting on the significance of elevating excellence. Consider all the achievements we've made as a district this year. Meeting after meeting, this room is flooded with accomplishments, celebrations, and reports. Multiple A+ schools of excellence, various student award recipients, and state champions, Superintendent of the Year. Or maybe you prefer to be reminded about the safety and security measures being used as the template by other districts, or about the 2 meals a day that are prepared each day for tens of thousands of students, some of whom don't know if they will have a third meal that evening. Regardless of the metrics you use to measure the success of a district, I am bold enough to claim that we just might be the premier district in the state. These accolades are easy to accomplish when you're surrounded by incredible leaders and colleagues, but we don't do the things we do for other reasons, other than because it's the right thing to do for the kids. But a 1% increase to our salaries and a now broken verbal agreement to not increase our insurance premiums doesn't feel like the right thing. It's not the right way to reward the staff for our contributions to these accomplishments. The reality is, public education has been woefully respected in Arizona and remains improperly funded, forcing even amazing districts to make difficult decisions. Board Member Warner, I want to extend my gratitude for openly meeting with leaders and advocates for public education within your role as a state senator and vice chair of the Committee on Education. I hope all of you continue to be the leaders this district and the state must have for continued successes and necessary improvements to the lives of the children and the lives of the staff responsible for their growth and development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And now Mark Ginsburg, followed by TJ Buckley.
Good evening, Board. My name is Mark Ginsburg. I'm a math teacher at Saguaro High School, and I've been in the district now for 4 years. Just a few things, just real short and sweet here. Scottsdale's tagline is to, if I get this right here, let's see, is to inspire, learn, and lead. The concern here is how we're going to lead when we're talking about a 1% raise, which we know is much less than inflation. With medical costs going up every year, sometimes close to double digits, how are we going to continue to do this? Our real wages in a 10-year period went down 6%. And this is according to the Economic Policy Institute. So, how are we going to continue to lead? How are we going to continue to retain and attract talent in this district? That's my concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. TJ Buckley, followed by Kurt Robinson.
Good evening, TJ Buckley, SEA President. The combined impact of soaring healthcare costs and the lack of education funding in the state of Arizona threatens the financial well-being of our members and the future of SUSD. For next year, rising healthcare premiums are forcing some members to pay as much as $28,986, or 41% of the average annual certified salary of $71,260, so those are next year's numbers, in premiums before even seeking medical care. This is an unsustainable burden, and it's outpacing salary increases. There will be no family plans under $12,000 in yearly premiums. The consequences of inaction are dire. SUSD leadership should prioritize addressing employee healthcare costs and increasing funding for public education by continuing collaborative efforts. Actively involve SEA in all levels of budget and healthcare discussions and continue to leave no stone unturned in order to lower the employee cost of health insurance. Write a governing board resolution. Publicly advocate for increased funding for public education to ensure the district's ability to provide affordable benefits and adequate cost of living adjustments for employees. Supporting SEA advocacy efforts. Actively support SEA in our efforts at both the local and the state levels to secure adequate funding for public schools to control healthcare costs. Healthcare costs increases and the lack of salary, of a cost of living adjustment, that's not just an SUSD problem, that's an everywhere problem. But as your SUSD employees who are working every day for the children of Scottsdale, it's very important for us that your voices are heard on these matters. Thank you.
Thank you, TJ. Kurt Robinson, followed by Patricia Pellet.
Hi, my name is Kurt Robinson. I've been a teacher in SUSD for 27 years. My wife has also. We met here at our school, and our children went through SUSD as well. And I'm here to talk about insurance. Our daughter has several challenges, and Dr. Menzel, thank you. And getting the care she needs has been painful and difficult for us. Insurance has added to our pain. On top of our premiums, to date, my wife and I have spent over $25,000 out of pocket to cover her expenses. We're both national board teachers. We've won Charles Awards. This year I had to ask my dad for a handout so I could cover my bills. This isn't working. And we all know why it is like this. It's the lack of funding and support from our state government. I'm calling on everyone in here. I'm calling on leadership. I'm calling on admin. I'm calling on classified and certified. I'm calling on guests. We all need to step up, and we need to demand and tell them this is enough. We need more funding. Teachers, children, employees are not making it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kurt. And Patricia Pellet.
Good evening, Governing Board. I am a proud mom of a boy with special needs at Kokopah, and I will give out some congrats to the SUSD district. It actually is one of the best for special needs. Anyways, on to the rest. So why is enrollment at Anasazi shrinking? As a former Anasazi parent, here is a recap for a few new school members. In first grade, parents received an email that Mother's Day will not be celebrated this year, as not all students have mothers. It wasn't referring to those who have lost their mothers. In second grade, we had furries, bathroom choice, social emotional tag, and PE. In third grade, we had Pebble Go lesson on citizenship, which means activism, protesting, with an example of Black Lives Matter parade, and walking out of class. The Spanish teacher at the end of the year was caught never teaching Spanish, but just telling stories, and had a Duolingo contest at the end of the year just to cap some hours. A third grade teacher at Anasazi trolling and attacking parents online, not only at night, sometimes while drunk, but also during school hours. Meanwhile, some good principals and teachers have been pushed out, but she's still here. On to Archway. My boy started there in fourth grade. My one boy said, "Mom, we don't play volleyball with balloons. We get real balls. Tests are on pen and paper. Tests are on paper. They don't get multiple chances and multiple choices." My boy's fourth grade teacher said, "Your boy can't even write a complete sentence." I was shocked because at Anasazi, everything was rubber stamped as a go. Remember, Menzel said years ago that we will lose enrollment in the name of equity. You need to focus on academics and fund the teachers, because teachers here and parents have all had enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Okay, we're going to ask for any comments or responses. Board, okay? Ms. Warner?
Yes, I'd like to have Jeff Forte put on an agenda so we can finally put this to bed, and so he can do other things on Tuesday evenings, and let's settle that. Thank you to Patrina. I appreciate your comments, and actually to all of you. You're all very right.
I'd like to
Kuczynski, go ahead.
pick up the recommendation that the board consider a public statement on public school funding in Arizona.
Okay. All right, any others? Okay, thank you so much. All right, that brings us to consent agenda items. I'll make the motion that we approve the consent agenda items A through Q minus L, which will be pulled and has been pulled, and we will resume that discussion after our information discussion items. I need a second.
I second the motion.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? No. All right, motion carries 5-0. And I think we have, is it Janie Fitzpatrick? Where are you? Please stand as our new Director of CTE. Thank you so very much. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
All right, that brings us to information discussion items. We have 5 tonight. The first one is the presentation of the Audit and Compliance Questionnaire for fiscal year 23-24.
Good evening, Board President Lewis, Vice President Sharkey, members of the board, Dr. Menzel, and guests. Tonight, we have a presentation on our annual audit. This is looking at the audit of our fiscal year 24, so last school year, and our auditor, Jennifer Shields, is here to present that.
Yeah, I think so. Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Menzel. Thank you for allowing me a few minutes of your time this evening to talk about last year's audit. As Ms. Crozier mentioned, this is for last fiscal year, so the year ended June 30th, 2024. And I'll run through a few slides and, well, maybe, there we go. There are certain items that the auditor is required to communicate to those charged with governance. So we'll go through some of those items here. Some of those items include the timeline, so you can see that up on the screen there. The audit is actually a very long process. We started it last May with the issuance of the engagement letter, and then we perform procedures from that period of time through the ultimate issuance of all of the audit reports. The financial audit report was dated in December of 2024, and that was when the actual financial statements were issued. In terms of the scope of services that Heinfeld Meach provides to the district, we perform an audit in accordance with U.S. generally accepted auditing standards, government auditing standards, and the uniform guidance. So there's a lot of standards that we follow. And then also we complete what's called the Uniform System of Financial Records Compliance Questionnaire. And that is a state document that goes through required compliance items that gets reported to the state Auditor General's office. In terms of responsibilities, there are a number of different responsibilities that get outlined in the engagement letter each year. Those that are management's responsibility, and then those are that are the auditor's responsibility. So in terms of fraud communications, our responsibility is to design our audit to be able to provide reasonable but not absolute assurance that there are no misstatements in the financial statements. And we just remind you that you all, in addition to management, have the ultimate responsibility for implementing programs and putting things in place to make sure that you are able to prevent and or detect any fraud that may occur. If something were to occur, you guys would find that through the process of your own internal controls. Excuse me, there are new accounting standards that come into play every year, and so this year is no exception. This year, the district was required to implement what's called GASB Statement Number 100, and it has to do with changes in financial presentation and or corrections of errors. So the district implemented a new accounting standard. Any audit that is done is, there are estimates that are contained within the financial statements. So that's no different here at Scottsdale versus any other school district or any other agency, to be honest. In terms of the district, the most important significant estimates in the financial statement are listed on the screen, and they involve things like there was a lot of discussion about insurance, and the district goes through a process to determine what the estimates are for unpaid claims. So that's a large estimate here at the district, as well as depreciable assets and the useful lives therein, and similar types of estimates. In terms of audit adjustments, there was one audit adjustment that was above a threshold that would require communication to you all, and it was related to some beginning balances. And later on in another slide, we'll talk about that there was a deficiency in internal control, and it was related to this audit adjustment that was required. In terms of We perform audit services. We also perform non-audit services that management oversees our services for. So we do assist with the preparation of the actual financial statements themselves and the required footnotes to those, including preparing journal entries and things like that so that the financial statements are properly presented. We also assist with what's called the data collection form. So that's a form that recaps all of the information related to the federal audit. There's a lot. I'm trying to go fast. Other required communications, there were no disagreements with management over financial accounting, reporting, and audit matters, so I'm pleased to report that to you. Management did provide us all of the required communications at the conclusion of the audit that we request. And then because we are your external auditors, we are required to maintain our own independence. And I am happy to report that our firm had no violations of any ethical or independence concerns. There are different reports that we issue, the 3 that are on the screen, and I'll talk a little bit about it. I don't know if you all were provided paper copies or PDF copies or both, but there's some highlights that I'm going to talk about on each one of the pages. So in the annual comprehensive financial report, that's the actual financial statements for the district. I'll point out page 20. This is my page. I'm responsible for pages 20 through 23, and that's your audit report. And I'm pleased to report that the district had an unmodified opinion. So that's the best audit opinion that you can get. And then those other pages are listed in case you or the public wanted to look at particular information. It just provides, like say the statistical section provides a nice overview of some historical financial data, and management's discussion and analysis talks about reasons for some of the changes in the financial statements. So I put those out there for your reference. With the single audit, so the single audit is what's required when the district spends more than $750,000 in any given year of federal assistance. You're required to have what's called a single audit. In the case of Scottsdale, you spent over $25.7 million during this last fiscal year of federal aid, so you're well over that threshold for needing to have a single audit. We look at, this is where we look at both federal programs, we look at programmatic compliance requirements, as well as the controls that are in place to make sure that you spend your money properly. And we looked at 3 federal programs. We audited the child nutrition cluster, so that's your free and reduced lunch breakfast programs. We looked at your child and adult care food program, which is an additional type of federal program that's run out of the food service department, or child nutrition department rather. And then also we audited the ESSER program. So ESSER was of course the largest federal program that you had, and that is on its way ceasing, and so we may see a little bit more money spent in the next audit, but the bulk of it has been expended by now. And then I mentioned that there was one deficiency in internal controls that was noted during the audit, and what that had to do with was the timing of a payment of an invoice was processed in the wrong fiscal year. So that was the audit adjustment that was required, and that was corrected by management. In terms of the USFR compliance questionnaire, there are quite a number of pages, a lot of different compliance requirements. There's over 18 different functional areas, if you will, that touch on things like governing board procedures, making sure that you all, post your agendas as required, provide for minutes, things like that. We look at those types of things. We also look at things like procurement practices, student attendance requirements, and then a whole host of other things that happen, like student activities or, just even like cash receipting and things like that. So the compliance, if there were any non-compliance issues, those would be reported in that USFR compliance questionnaire. That document is the one that the state uses to determine whether or not the district is in substantial compliance. And then just final comments, I just want to thank management. Shannon and her team do a great job. They are very responsive. It's, as you can tell, it's a very long process to go from May till now to work with your auditors, and we ask for a lot of information that they are very gracious to pull and gather for us so that we can perform our procedures in a timely fashion. And then just looking forward to next year, there is another big accounting standard. There's always a new accounting standard that has to be implemented. And this year, coming up, it will be related to compensated absences. And what those are is that's essentially your vested vacation and sick leave that you owe your employees upon separation. So there's it'll be a big lift for the district to implement this next accounting standard. And so with that, that concludes my presentation, but I'm happy to stand for questions.
Board, any questions? Dr. Potensky?
Thank you for your presentation. And as part of your compliance work, do you look at our whistleblower mechanisms, and do you opine on the status of our whistleblower policies and mechanisms?
Madam President, thank you. That's whistleblowing is not currently a compliance requirement item that the Auditor General puts out there. In terms of audit standards, we do look at things such as if any complaints are raised, or as part of our fraud discussions and fraud interviews with various people throughout the district, including a board member, we would ask if anybody is aware of anything that we should know about that would then alter our procedures that we planned for. But there is definitely no opinion given on those, and it's not a compliance requirement.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you so very much, and thank you and congratulations to the team.
Thank you.
Okay, this brings us to budget process discussion. You want to start?
So Shannon comes to the podium for a rather lengthy PowerPoint presentation. The purpose of the discussion tonight is to really kind of outline the budget process, the annual cycle that school districts go through, because we are midway through this fiscal year, but the budget planning for the next fiscal year started last fall. So Shannon's going to walk us through the process that we undergo to prepare for the following school year budget analysis. And we'll take time at the end of these slides to be able to, each one, to have dialogue about questions or things that you might need to clarify. But Shannon, we're going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, I would ask it not at the end.
Yes, it's
but
after
at
each
the end of
slide,
each slide.
throughout
Thank
the
you.
presentation, so that we don't have to go back and say, what slide was that?
Exactly.
Yeah, we'll do it each one.
Thank you, sir.
Or Dr.
There it is.
Stand closer. Oh, okay. I'll start over again. Good evening, Dr. Lewis, or President Lewis, Vice President Sharkey, members of the board, Dr. Menzel, and guests. As mentioned, we are going into a lengthy discussion about the budget and timelines. So with that, this first slide just really starts looking at the budget year. We start as early as August, looking at what possibilities are there for the budget. We start with an IBN, or interest-based negotiations kickoff, start talking about the budget overflow or budget overview. In mid to late October, we hit the 40th day mark for the district, which is important in that it helps us to start forming ideas of what enrollment could look like for the following year. It's also used by human resources as they start planning for staffing for the following year. November, HR starts that estimating enrollment for the following year, looking at what that staffing could look like and prepping for that. And then in December, we start with IBN updates again. Human resource staff, it goes actually out to the sites and starts working with the sites on that staffing. Then in January, we're here with the board talking about what those projections look like for the early projections. We have the 100th day hits towards the end of January, which is a big deal for us because the 100th day is how the average daily membership is based off of the first 100 days of enrollment. So that's a big mile marker for us. Additionally, we start going out to our departments saying, you need to start thinking about your budget for next year, compiling what those requests are going to look like, sending those over so we can start reviewing them. And then continuing to meet with the IBN teams. We get into February, we now have our 100th day, which we use to do school departments. So we start sending that out to the schools so they have an idea of their M&O and capital allocations for next year. Presenting that information to the governing board. HR is from like November on, meeting with schools on staffing and what that looks like and planning for that.
By the time we get to the end of February, we're making an estimate of what the funding is available for salary increases, which means we've got to have a pretty good idea on what the budget looks like, what we think the budget's going to look like, but also a pretty good idea of where they're going to be budget savings for us. Because by the time we get to February and start saying this is how much we have for salary increases, that stuff has got to start to get pretty solid. In March, we do the recommendation for salary increases so that they can put out the certified contracts by March 15th. And those go out April. Well, today we're doing our budget discussion, still having those discussions, but administrative contracts and classified employee work agreements start going out in April. By May, we're trying to also close out the fiscal year that we're in. So by May 15th, we have to do a budget revision of the current budget that we're in and wrap that up, even though the year doesn't actually end until June 30th, and we still pay things throughout August. And then by the time we get to June, we have the proposed and adopted budget. Really, to have those things completed and ready to go to the board for the first board meeting, we have everything wrapped up in our system ready to go by mid-May, because we have to have time to double check, make sure we've got things entered in correctly, and then get those things into form. Hopefully, we have the form from the AG's office to actually put those things in, and budgets have been decided by the state at that point. So by the time we get to June, we do the proposed and adopted and start the new school year and start the new process all over again. So that really takes a look at what is our budget timeline when we're looking at future year.
Dr. Potensky?
So thank you for putting this together. It's very clear, and as a new board member, this idea that I've sort of been dropped into the middle of a budget cycle at first was confusing to me, but I kind of understand the context better. What I don't see here is in prior discussions, there was reference to the board at the beginning of the budget cycle weighing in, and that's what then set the context for IBN and what followed. And I don't see a board item explicitly listed here. Can you or Dr. Menzel, can you speak to kind of where in this cycle does the board first say, as we look out, unfortunately, assuming we're declining in enrollments, we think it's really important to do this or safeguard this, or it's time to look at this?
So that happens in two ways. And in this past year, it didn't happen. The year before it did. So in part, it happens when the board approves the agreements with the employee groups. So the SEA agreement, the SSPA, and the SAA agreement identify parameters, working conditions, they identify ratios, they identify the components that get to the core of when Shannon was talking about the staffing allocations for the buildings. Those ratios are identified in the agreements that the governing board approves, which is every June. So part of it is codified in the agreements that are approved. 2 years ago, not this last year, and I can explain my reason why I think that it didn't happen. We had a contentious relationship at the board table during some of those conversations. But 2 years ago, we did have an executive session where the governing board talked about its priorities for bargaining. And that was something that was put on the table. That one happened later than I would normally recommend. I think that was probably a January conversation. I think that conversation needs to happen no later than August so that it's at the front end of the conversation. So there are two ways. One is when the board adopts the agreements, it's creating the parameters for us to begin the conversation. And then when you think about budget targets for the following year, even when we don't know all of the specifics because the state legislative process doesn't conclude until, they target April, but the last few years it's been the end of June. We don't know what we're going to get from the state, so everything we're doing is based on assumptions. But the board, in terms of identifying the priorities, you think about the big picture, the value proposition that's important for the board, that should happen in August before IBN gets fully underway so that we as an entire team are operating with those parameters.
Thank you. So as we look ahead to the next budget cycle, assuming we all get along with each other, that would happen in August of...
Yes, that would be the plan. That would be the optimal situation.
Thank you.
Mr. Sharkey?
On the IBN process, I see in March the IBN's salary recommendation is there. Other decisions that come out of IBN. So as the board, we're not, and I believe we should not be involved in IBN, but there were comments during the public comments of a broken agreement on costs, not litigating that at all, but if there were agreements such as that, when do those happen, and when do we know about those kinds of agreements?
So there are two parts, right? The final agreement is brought forward for board approval in June. We have to do some of the elements ahead of time in order to be able to issue contracts. The health insurance piece kind of falls in between as we're building the budget. People want to know. And we have to make those decisions in order for the renewal period. We have to be able to populate the information so people can make informed decisions when we're renewing, because our health insurance year is July to June, not a calendar year. And so we have to have that information done sooner. So agreements aren't, part of the reference there is our aspirational goal going into bargaining was not to have additional increases. What happened with respect to the reality of health insurance cost increases, not only based on our experience, because as self-insured, we cover all of those costs. Kairos recommended, based on the industry trends, a 9.5% increase.
Sure, and actually, I don't want to litigate that.
Okay,
That's
but
the process, because what I don't want, the relationship between us as a decision-making body and the IBN process, I want to make sure, at least for me, I feel like that's, there's a separation there, but we want to know. We want to know if things come out of that we should be aware of, like, oh, during IBN, we said X is going to happen, we promise X. So I want to make sure that we get wind of that so that there's no sort of crossed lines.
Right, a commitment in the IBN table, because we operate by consensus, should be documented by the participants and then codified in the agreement that comes forward in June.
Okay, but when they get agreed upon, let's say it's February, would we get feedback and say, oh, as an interim, this agreement was...
So on the compensation front, we did that. The groups agreed not only individually but collectively on the recommendation that was brought forward to the board. We wouldn't bring that recommendation forward if it hadn't been the product of the IBN process.
Thank you.
We'll see.
I'm just going to make a comment that it's a more on a grand scale, because I'm very, very familiar with the operational cycle of the job of the staff and what we go through annually pretty much across the state, waiting on state allocations and what's going to happen with the feds and all the moving pieces, including insurance rates. That being said, if we were to have a creative, strategic conversation about, and there, you don't have to answer this is not a question for now, it's a thought for later. If we were to have a 4-year guess on declining enrollment and anticipated loss or gains in the budget, and what we could prioritize over a 4-year period of time, I would like to introduce that at some point for a strategic way of thinking. No need to comment at this juncture.
And I will say, this wasn't in there, but we don't get the amount for the increase in medical insurance. We got it as soon as possible, but it was the last day of February when we received that number. So that is another part that factors in, is that we're making decisions on salary have to be decided upon before March, but the insurance portion of it, we never know what that increase is going to be until, unfortunately, later. Basically, it was basically March 1st when we get that information. Okay. All right. This next slide, we talk primarily about M&O and capital. Those are the two more flexible funds within our budget, but this looks at what are all of the different funds that we do have within our budget. Again, M&O, although is only 44%, it is the one that most things are, most salaries, district operations are paid from. Some of these funds are very restricted. So for instance, debt service is 7%, $30 million. That can only go to pay for our debt, principal and interest on our bonds. Insurance trust, again, 9%, that can only be used for paying medical insurance, property casualty insurance, and workers' compensation. We cannot move money back out of that. We can't pay people out of it. The only thing we can do on that is not fully fund it, which we've done for several years in some of those cases, like property casualty. But they're restricted on what we do. Cash accounts, again, is another big one. We do pay quite a few salaries out of cash accounts. However, most cash accounts are restricted on what you can do. So we're limited to a handful of cash accounts that we can utilize, like indirect costs and some rental monies, to be able to move expenses out of M&O, pay them out of cash, and free up some of our M&O expenses. Seeing nothing, I'm going to move on to the next one. Average daily membership. We talk about average daily membership a lot because that is the main component of the budget. That is what drives how much we receive from the state other than the base level, which is the amount per student. Average daily membership is different than enrollment. Enrollment is how many kids do we have at any given time. Average daily membership is how many students did we have within the first 100 days of school. And if they come in later, then that's not a full 1.0 average daily membership. In the case of SOL, it looks at the amount of minutes that a student logs. So enrollment, those things are all very important. They play into it, but the average daily membership is really based off of how many students are enrolled from day 1 through day 100. As you can see, pre-COVID, it was a little bit all over the board as to how much it was changing. Since COVID, we flattened out. Our 10-year average is 2%. The last few years, our decline has been 2%. And so that, because it drives how much we receive from the state, is really a driving force when we talk about budget issues. One thing with that that I didn't include in here is the total student weighted count. That gets confused sometimes too. Average daily membership, we get weights, depending on if you're a kindergartner, if you're a high school, if you're special needs students, K-3 reading program, free and reduced lunch, gifted, those types of things. So it takes that average daily membership. Then we get weights for students based on what grade level they're in, based on if they have a special additional, they call them Group B weight for special ed, gifted, those types of things. And that's how we get to our total student weighted count number. So when we talk about in the next couple of slides, what is the reduction in that? That's looking at what is our ADM with a 2% reduction and then placing those on those weights.
I think for the community's benefit, it is noteworthy that we've been declining for over 10 years. When you have the ups and downs of COVID, and it's a separate conversation of what's driving that, how much of it is demographics, how much of that is market share or the growth in alternative options. But from a budgeting perspective, the reality is for the past 10 years, we've been declining and 2% on average. So as we deal with difficult decisions like assistant principals, wherever we end up with that, like health insurance, wherever we end up with that, like salaries, wherever we end up with that, I do think a context is the state, but a context is also just we are a declining enrollment district. And I want to remind the community as well that when you forecasted this cycle's, I forget the technical term, ADM?
We did the student weight count.
You
the
came
total,
within
a handful. I mean, it was
2 students or 3 students.
Surprisingly close.
Which, given you did that 18 months in advance, is really remarkable and gives me confidence in terms of using this as the basis of our budgeting.
I accept that, and thank you for that. I will say that there's probably more luck involved in that one when it comes
Well,
to
now
our
I'm less confident, but
Sorry, I should stop. But thank you. Yeah, it is. We really have seen those differences, and quite honestly, it's not just Scottsdale. You see across. Seems like every couple of days on the news, more districts are talking about the decline in enrollment and how it's impacting, and jobs being reduced and schools being closed and really difficult situations happening in schools. So this takes a look at our M&O estimated revenue summary. So as we talked about student weighted count, we project that going down by 463. To put that in terms of numbers, that's $2.3 million reduction. So we start off with that. We anticipate a 2% increase to the base level, increases it by about $100 per student. So that increases our revenue by 2.6. So between the two, we're kind of evening out. We're ahead just a little bit. We get additional money for Teacher Experience Index. And what that means is The state takes a look at all of the teachers' experience within school districts, develops a state average. Ours happens to be a little bit above the state average, so we get additional dollars for that. So because of that, and we get more than 154,000, but the increase for next year to our revenue is about 154,000 for that. You just saw the audit presentation. We do get to claim that back on our budget, and so the audit has gone up each year, as everything seems to, and so that allowance is about 27,000 more. So we start out there with just a little bit more in our revenue from the prior year, 427,000. We have amazing community that has been so generous and passed our overrides over the last few years. They passed our M&O override just a couple years ago. It took place this current year. So that provides additional dollars for us, roughly 22 million. However, because budgets are decreasing, we anticipate that going down about 300,000 from what we received this year. We have what's called energy project savings. And so what that is we, over the course of several years ago, did different solar and energy saving projects. We did a lighting project. We leased those, and so the money to pay the principal and interest back to our banking financial system that leased us that money for that comes from moving money from M&O over to this energy savings. Because we're getting closer to the end on some of those payments, we have a savings there of about $290,000. The difficult part is that we do have a budget reduction in our carry forward of about 3.1 million. That stems from a couple things. One, last year the governing board approved another 1% raise for employees that was coming off of the carry forward. So that obviously impacts that. But we know that we're hiring more people, which is good. Positions are filled, but that means there's less position vacancy savings. We also know that schools and departments are just spending more of their budgets. They're not overspending. The district is not in any way overspending, but they are spending more of the budget that they're allocated. When that happens, that means that we have less to carry forward. So that is projected to be at about 3.1 million. The Prop 123, the state allocated $75 million in additional funds for Prop 123. That ends in this fiscal year. What I have been told is that right now, that is in the proposed budget to fill that $75 million. Until the budget is approved, we don't know for sure what that'll be there, but we do know that that is something that's being talked about down at the state. So that could change what that reduction is. And we've been sharing, I don't have it on here, but in the previous ones, we've shared that we knew that it was going to be somewhere between like 2.8 and 4.1, depending on what happened with the Prop 123. So that's just looking at the revenue and the year over change from last year. Any questions?
Just want to say thanks. This and upcoming slide 13 do a really good job of just showing piece by piece of where the deficits are from and where the savings are coming from. So it's really nice to break it down to those pieces so we can get a better feel as opposed to this kind of nebulous, we're down a few $1 million. We can really see the pieces. So thank you for explaining this.
Absolutely. Okay. Next is we look at the M&O budget. This is breaking it down by category. This is based off of what is in our budget right now. Please keep in mind, we will be doing a budget revision in May. We load budget and what we call budget control groups, which can have a variety of codes on it. And then when we do our revision, we move the budget around to line up with where the actual expenses are. However, that being said, we know year after year after year after year, salary and benefits is always at least 80, if not a little bit more than 80% of our budget. So when we do talk about, that we have a reduction in revenue, which generally means a reduction in expenses that we need to look at, the rough part is that because of the nature of what we do here in education, 80% of our budget, the bulk of our budget is people and benefits. 5% of that is utilities. Those are pretty fixed. As much as we want to try to save water and electricity and do those things, it seems like we try to save those things and then, it still goes up because the utility costs go up in what they're charging. So those are pretty much fixed. And then supplies and services makes up another 15% or $29 million. I had a question on what that is, and I will in the future break that down a little bit more, so it breaks it up a little bit more. But just to name a few of the really high cost things that are sitting in there, we had $5.4 million that was one-time monies in the FY24 budget. We didn't spend them. They carried over to this year. We used that to do $2 million to help off with insurance this year, medical insurance this year, and we did a stipend to folks. So that's one of the biggest ones in there. We did 2.6 million is set aside for custodial and facility needs, 3.8 million for contracted services, contracted custodial services. So that's just the folks that come in and clean our buildings. 3.8 million for contracted services for SPED. So that includes the services that we're paying for individuals coming in, but we also have private day placement. We also have a contract service with, it's a grant with, it's transition from school to work that goes through there.
Just because we have a lot to cover, do you mind if, unless we have questions?
Okay, then
not
I'll go
breaking
right,
into
I'll pass
detail?
it.
Is that okay?
Yep. I'm gonna assume there's no other questions on that and move on to the next one. This one looks at expense area, and I broke it down in the way that the Auditor General does their AG report. So that really comes down to, they call them function codes. So a classroom support would be 1,000. That's gonna be teachers and paraeducators. Maintenance and security is a 2,600. School support actually ends up with instructional support in 21s and 2,200s. But I split them out between schools and district office to really kind of show where are the dollars within the M&O budget going to. The good thing is 55% of that, over 55% of that, is budgeted directly into the classroom, directly with teachers and paraeducators. The next biggest area you can see is maintenance and security. I know that security has been a major concern for folks in our district, and so there's been a lot of money that's gone into that of late, as well as keeping our facilities open is just expensive to do. I won't read all of those, excuse me, but you can see really, I think we're trying to make sure that the budget within the M&O hits the areas that are closest to the schools, exception there being maintenance and security, but those guys are on the schools, taking care of the schools as well. Are there questions on that slide?
So I just want to make sure I understand what you're doing here.
Okay.
I think the intent is to say the way we're used to looking at how the budget is categorized sometimes can lead people to misinterpret. So you have a big thing called administration, and then we assume it's a whole bunch of folks at the annex. But in reality, assistant principals are part of administration. Principals are part of administration. So what you're trying to do is give us a view that allows us to look kind of pro forma through that and better come up with the percentages that are spent on site versus, you know, in a district office.
Absolutely, and this is just looking at M&O when they do the AG's report that encompasses like almost every single fund within the district. This is just within M&O. But absolutely, when we talk about administrative costs in that report, it includes district personnel, but it includes the principals, assistant principals, but it also includes their admin assistants as well, which are classified hourly folks. So when we say the administrative costs within the district, it really encompasses more, it's not the same thinking as, well, that's an administrator, that's what they're talking about. It really breaks it down by what is their, for lack of a better word, what is their function code, which comes down to principals, assistant principals, but also it doesn't come, I mean, general administration is part of that as well.
Thank you.
Yep. This next slide looks at things the exact same way, only it's looking at the FTE. And when I tried to combine FTE with the budget itself, it got pretty clunky and hard to read. So again, this really looks at it within FTE, same type of thing, showing that 59% of that, almost 60% of the FTE is directly in the classroom, followed by social, school supports, and then maintenance and security, and then school administration. So again, really trying to make sure that the staffing is going into the schools or supporting the schools.
So about 7% is in central administration, the last three
Yeah.
columns.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay. And then just breaking down the district a little bit more, I know it gets when we start talking about supplies and services or what are we spending on other areas. This just takes a little bit deeper into between those areas. And I know finance, HR, IT, and communications are all lumped together. That's just because of how they're coded. But looking at where is the money really at? As you can see within those areas, the bulk of it is in most cases, supplies and salaries and benefits. I'm happy to see that at a district level, you would want to see that the higher numbers are in instructional support, which means those folks that are supporting the schools, even though they're at the district level. And then, of course, maintenance and security, big one in there. Utilities is a big amount, as well as contracted custodial and resource officers are pretty hefty. So same information, just trying to break it down even farther at a district level.
And not to put you on the spot, but I'll put you on the spot.
Okay.
If you think about it on a year-over-year or trending basis, which of these 5 categories is responsible for the greatest amount of increase in district office spending?
Right now, maintenance and security, I would say.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Sorry, Josh. That's not a bad thing, though. Here, we've taken a look at the district level supports. This just broke down, and some of this ends up also coming in our AFR when we do our school by school report. That's off of actual expenses. This is based off of budget. But looks at, within this first slide is the elementary schools. Within this, looking at our enrollment, looking at, and I broke it down 2 ways, all funds, which is literally every single fund, and just M&O to look at what does it cost, what is the budget for a school, and how much of that is essentially, what is the cost per student at those schools. I think that comes into play for a couple of things. Obviously, the higher the enrollment is at a school, the more efficiently we can use those dollars, the more efficiently we can staff. But those, when you start to look at it, those are the ratios that we have at those schools and what it's costing to run the schools. And definitely something to keep in mind as we start thinking about the future and knowing that enrollment is continuing to go down and tough decisions are having to be made all over the state.
Board questions, comments? Okay.
I'm going to move on. This one is just the middle school K-8s and high school in Seoul, broken down the same way. Okay. Yep. This one looks at the department level position history of with all funds that's happened at the district level. I have in here transportation. I also can tell you with numbers pulled out with transportation and nutritional services. We made a big cut in reducing bus driver positions because we were doing contracted services for that. Even pulling both nutritional services and transportation out, that change is at the 3% mark for district level positions. I think it's important to note we've heard the board talk about that cuts need to come at a district level. They need to not impact schools. They need to be as far away from schools as possible. So in listening to that, we do have 13 positions within the department level that we are proposing to reduce for next year. The prior year, there was also a reduction. That was about 13, almost 14 going into this year. But as you can see, there's some departments have gone up a little bit. Some of them look like big percentage changes, but it's because they don't have that many staff within that area. But we are definitely trying to make those reductions at the district level. And I will say this is looking strictly at people who are not at the school. So district level staff, teacher on assignment are these folks. It does not include the people who are out on the school campuses doing work.
Marnie?
Thank you. I just had a question under superintendent. The The one position, what is that?
So Michelle Jenny, we have a position that sits at the front of the MDA that has been split between security and communications. We aren't able to divide that out within our system the right way. It ends up showing as one person in communications or one person in security. In addition, her job is really like the same as Lily, that sits in the front of the other side. And so we are moving that position out of trying to split it between communications and security, and it'll be under the superintendent's area. Even though she'll still be doing support for security and communications, the responsibility will be under the superintendent.
And where she sits, so if you come in Building A, you're going to see Lily. When you come into the other part of Building A that's closer to Building B, that's where Michelle Jennings sits. Similar function in terms of not only, they have some different roles and responsibilities, but greeting the public and others that come in. And so that responsibility will fall under how Gladys supervises that support for the public-facing aspect of our welcoming of the constituents we serve.
So it's not really a reduction, it's just moving it from where it was into a different area.
Okay, did I just hear that Gladys is her supervisor?
Yeah, Gladys supervises Lily now and will supervise Michelle.
Okay, so will the org chart be changing
Yes.
to reflect that? Okay, sorry, that's the first time I've heard that. Thank you.
Please don't read into this question.
Okay.
We cut 13 out of the district office last year. We're proposing to cut another 13 this cycle. Is that an absolute reduction of 13, or were any of those individuals reclassified or reassigned or just moved around, so to speak?
Some of them some are straight reductions. Some, like one of them that we have in here is a change. We have a position in finance that we're going to combine with, I think it was just approved, combines our grant writer position with a fiscal position that was a grant fiscal position in finance. So we're combining that. We're still eliminating that one job though. So one person might be taking over more responsibilities. Anytime we eliminate positions, we're shifting around job duties to other folks.
We're not reducing by 3 by just reclassifying them as site-based or something like that?
No.
And any of the 13 proposed, are they all vacant currently, or are there individuals who will be losing their employment?
There is one that was not vacant. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you mind clarifying that? One that was not vacant, the rest were vacant?
Yes, we're vacant, or somebody is retiring, or
Yeah, we're not
will be.
backfilling.
Yeah, will not be.
Yes, so
Yeah.
nobody lost their jobs.
I'm sorry. Nobody lost. No, nobody was riffed.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. This next one kind of just shows where the ebb and flow is with revenue and savings. So, if we start out with a $4.1 million reduction, we allocated $1.5 million for salary increases, $1 million to go towards medical insurance, $500,000 towards budget changes, which I'll be honest, I'm worried is a little bit low with some of the budget requests that I've seen, and knowing some things with property insurance. We are anticipating moving $4.2 million from capital or DAW over to M&O to deal with the bulk of the revenue loss there. And then recommended savings, which will come up in a couple slides later, is almost $3 million, just shy of $3 million, which puts us pretty flush with where we would need to be.
Shannon?
Yeah.
This is good for showing like the district savings or the cuts we made to kind of make up the difference. In the future, something to think about, the increased premiums on employees can be seen as a way for us to kind of push it under someone else's rug, not that in that way, but it might be good to get a clearer picture at some point and say, hey, here's what we have to make up, here's the savings the cuts we made, and also here's the impact to staff through insurance premiums, because that's non-trivial, And at least it shows, like, we can say, hey, we saved money, but also don't forget this impacted the folks too, because we have raises on here,
Yeah.
which impacts them. So just maybe a way of, when we consider the impact to the school, we also include that so that we don't kind of forget about it.
Absolutely. Okay, so then this gets into the budget reduction recommendations. The top part, the gray highlighted ones, are things that were brought at a previous board meeting. SPED private placement was actually brought earlier, but we had estimated that at 1.5 million. We're working with SPED in the IDEA grant, so we've changed that to $1 million coming out of M&O for private placement. However, there are positions within IDEA that need to be moved to M&O, so that has an $800,000 impact to the budget. We've been working with a lot of different ratios, set some ratios for paras, and still trying to really honor making sure that we have good supports for our classrooms and our students and staff. But there's a reduction there of about $125,000 for some savings there. One of the items that was approved earlier this evening looks at is moving the SOL principal and combining that with community ed. That was a function we had in the past with community ed. That saves the SOL position. Additionally, community ed isn't paid through, that position isn't paid through M&O, it's paid through community ed as well. But that's $150,000 savings. There was a vacancy within one of the senior executive admin assistant positions, so we will not be filling that. As mentioned before, combining the fiscal grant support position with our grant writer, so that's a savings within the finance department for that. We had been budgeting $100,000 for the city of Scottsdale audits. We have never used $100,000. The most we've done is like $65,000. So the recommendation was to still keep that at 67, but that would be a budget reduction of about $33,000. Knowing that if something came up that there was an issue, we could always reevaluate that and obviously do a special audit if needed above what was budgeted there. And then Desert Canyon, looking at ratios there, we had a librarian retiring and the ratio was higher than what we see at other schools, as well as an office position. Person is retiring or leaving, and so not filling those positions for a savings of $133,000. So all of that together puts us at the 2.9 million savings.
Mrs. Carney?
Thank you. A few questions on this. As far as the para change, could you better explain how we're able to cut $125,000 for paras?
So looking at, we had some one-to-one ratio, and I might have to pull Amy Goff to talk about part of this too. We had some one-to-one paras that we are no longer going to need. Like, students are no longer enrolled with us, so we don't need to have that one-to-one ratio for those students. And then looking at, do we need paras in some of the classes that you would not typically see a para in? And so with those ratio adjustments, it saves 9 FTE, and that equated to about $848,000 with benefits.
Okay.
And with that para change, I should say, it actually was higher, but we're also proposing to raise the salary on those para positions because they are very hard to fill.
But Shannon, how does that address the $125,000 reduction in para cost?
So the net with what we're reducing, and then also raising that, the net is still a savings of $125,000.
Mr. Sharkey?
Sorry, I wasn't finished.
I'm sorry, Ms.
That's
Carney.
okay. That's okay. Thank you. I'd just like to, so what is happening with the current SOL principal then, that we're dissolving that position?
Do you want to?
So we'll issue a contract. There are a number of open administrative positions, and so there'll be a place for that individual to land. It's yet to be determined where that is, but we expect that he'll be a part of our team going into next year.
Okay, then lastly, for the Desert Canyon office ratio update, are we saying they'll no longer have a librarian?
They already had a librarian. They had more, it was like 2 FTE within there and an assistant. And so we're just leveling that out a little bit.
Okay, so they'll have one.
They'll still have the same like every other middle school, elementary has.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
They just had more than everybody else did.
Mr. Sharkey?
On the AP ratio change, so that's the 6 FTEs down to half, correct? So, there's been a lot of community feedback on that. So, if there was a desire to change that, we've got to make up 307K from somewhere else to fill that hole, correct?
That would be correct.
Okay.
Mrs. Warner?
Thank you, President. I asked for this agenda item, and I appreciate the presentation that you put together. It's very good. So, and I asked the question, where are you guys looking to make cuts so that we can keep the APs? And I understand that people have gone through the process of ratios and all that, but our community wants full-time APs at all of the schools, and frankly, they deserve it. Our students do, and so do our families. So I'm going to ask you again, where have you guys worked to make that happen?
I would say with part of the additional positions that we looked at in saying, okay, where else can we make changes? Where else are there vacancies that we can reduce that? That definitely played a part. I mean, as you can see, there's quite a few that were added on. I mean, is it enough to cover the whole 3,000 or 300,000? No, I know we've been talking quite a bit about what changes can still happen in there. It's just getting more and more difficult to find.
So what services or products of, discretionary spending that the district spends money on can be cut back, that we could build that up, pool money together to make up for that? Because, the site staff are service providers for our customers. So without them, we don't really have a business. So it is important that we take care of our sites, our principals, our assistant principals, and the people that are hands-on with our students every day.
And I would say we went through every department's budget request and actually the schools get an allocation. We cut almost all of those by 3%. So most departments are seeing, in some cases, that's not possible. I mean, I can't cut how much we pay towards property casualty or for an audit. Facilities and transportation are struggling with the amount of repairs that are having to happen and dealing with those. But we did go through every single budget. And like I said, I think all but those couple of budgets, we're told your budget has to go down by 3%. Even with all that, I'm still looking at it going, I gotta find more places to cut within the department budgets because the $500,000 we have set aside here isn't going to meet all of those needs. So I think we still keep looking. At this point, I don't know where to find another 300,000.
So have you looked at our travel budget, conferences, consultants?
Those were
memberships?
those are part of the department budgets that were all reduced. We didn't reduce, the schools, they get $1,600, each school gets an allocation. We didn't cut that part. But within department budgets, everybody's budget was told you need to cut that by.
Okay, so what did we do at the district office related to those?
With professional development and
Just with travel, conferences, consultants, memberships, and so on. So, we're in a position where we have to, just make things tighter so that we can provide for our most important staff. So I'm just curious what has been cut from those areas. We had some discussion around it at our last meeting.
I mean, I don't have a dollar figure that I could say we've cut X amount from those areas. That's definitely something I can pull and research for you. I can tell you, like I said, when we went through department budgets, which encompasses if they want to pay for professional development or those types of things, all of them, we went through and said, and some of them cut more than 3%, but we went through and said, unless it's something like you have to do, you have to pay the insurance bill, we really need to cut those, you need to figure out how to cut those by 3%.
Thank you.
So not to put words in your mouth, but to put words in your mouth, is it fair to say you are still working on it?
I mean, we work on this until the very end. We don't have budgets loaded yet, so we keep working on it. It's fair to say that, yes, we're working on where can we save and where do things land, all the way until we have we have things into the budget forms.
Yeah. I mean, I know it's a lot to ask, and anything you take from one place is going to affect another place that has its own constituencies. I also am someone that would appreciate at least having the option to understand what those trade-offs are, given the importance of assistant principals. And then toward maybe a related question, Prop 123, $1.4 million, a little less. How do we think about that then? Is your recommendation perhaps that the board kind of create a list of, if this comes through, then we reverse X decision and Y decision, and that's how we ultimately reflect our priorities?
So, and yes, if that, when the state budget comes out and we know if it's definitive, this is what we have, there are decisions. I mean, we are moving money from DA over, so we don't have to move as much. We did learn today that right now our projected federal grant budgets were reduced by over $1.7 million. So that is concerning. They always reduce it a little bit, and then we find out later we get a little bit more. But without knowing exactly what that's going to be, we know right now that what's been allocated to us is $1.7 million less than what we had received last year. So there's a definite concern that obviously contracts have gone out. We have people in positions. There is a concern that if that is really reduced by $1.7 million, I'm not saying that every single penny of that couldn't be cut at levels, but a significant portion of that would more than likely be pushed to M&O at this point.
And I want to just add to that. So the answer is the plan move from capital to M&O was carry forward funds in capital. And we're careful not to dip into the ongoing appropriation in capital, but to carry forward. So in fact, what you said in terms of you could look at that as if we have the offsetting revenue that reduces, there is a possibility to have that conversation. It doesn't answer some of the longer term questions, but it might be able to allow us to land the budget for this coming year while we put in place the things to say, what do we need to do long term over 3 or 4 years to be able to get there? So I think it's a both and. I think there's a path to land the plane to address those priorities of the board. It's still going to be a concern with respect to the long term financial health, but I think we can get there for this year.
And I understand your point. Don't get excited about potential upside, because there also could be potential downside. And that's just part of the dynamics over the next month or two.
Absolutely.
Mr. Sharkey?
On the AP ratios, this is for Shannon and Dr. Menzel. Sorry.
Sorry, I just didn't see a green light. Okay.
You're good. Oh,
Okay. I don't know why.
my green light went away.
Back to my comment about IBN, and apologize if this was addressed in last month's meeting. I didn't necessarily see it, but the ratio was determined through IBN and SAA. I believe that's part of that discussion. Going back to that line between the board not wanting to usurp what's done in agreements, I would fully love to fund those, would want to keep those as full positions, but also want to respect. Has there been any decision that, yes, it's, even though the ratios were set at when it goes below the threshold, they go to half FTE? Are we saying that it's okay to try to fill that, or is there still any discussion over whether that was an agreement? I just want to know where that is, since we're not involved.
So I appreciate the question. I think there are a couple of components that are important to understand. One, oftentimes, and it's true in the SAA case, when we think about that kind of ratio change, we push it out a year before we implement so people can prepare for it. And so we'd had the conversation 2 years ago. We've adopted the language and said that we would look to implement in the 25-26 school year. So that was contemplated in the agreement. Now, the truth is we've had ratios for student teachers for a very long time. In fact, our M&O overrides have said we're going to maintain those ratios, so that doesn't change. In some instances, you can walk into a classroom and you'll have teachers that have fewer students. We don't insist on a rigid adherence to that if we don't have to. But with budget constraints, we've been working closer to make sure that we're aligning with those ratios, because we don't have the extra money to be able to have the smaller class sizes. So that's part of the give and take of the budget. So if we didn't honor what's in the agreement, there would be one concern that all of the hard work leading to that, we're going to right size so that we can properly deploy our resources in other places. That kind of gets set aside. There's an argument, you heard it from the public, you've seen it in the emails with respect to the value of having 2 administrators on a campus. That lends itself to, then the board is going to have to tackle the even bigger question, do we keep buildings open? Because when you have 220, 250 students on a campus, and you have 2 full-time administrators, and you have another campus with 700 students and 2 full-time administrators, that imbalance becomes unsustainable over time. So yes, the board could move in this direction, but recognize that it pushes down the road by 1 year more difficult decisions. And it would not honor what was agreed to in IBN, but it is something the board could do.
So, don't know if it's hearsay, but don't want to speak for the SAA, but did they say, yes, we agreed to those ratios, but we really want to keep them too, and if you could find a way to keep the budget, we're okay with it? Or is that conversation not happening?
To be honest, SAA, I think we have representatives still in the room, they didn't ever want to cut assistant principals. I mean, that wasn't where we started. What we talked about is what makes sense financially, what's sustainable when you look at the disproportionality, because we were hearing it on both ends. We had larger middle schools saying, we have a principal and assistant principal, but we have more discipline issues. We have 3 times as many students as some of the buildings. How does that make sense? So we tackled the question from how do we have ratios that are justifiable where we're providing equivalent kinds of support? And I think there were 13 different options at one point that were considered. And we took into account, is it a title building? Do they have more than 3 special education programs, which might require more administrative support? So we did look at those other variables to have a context-specific decision that was made before the final agreement was brought forward to the governing board.
So if we scratch and claw and get $305K to keep the ratios where they are, is everybody okay with that all down the line? Or does that have any negative impact on future negotiations or trust or anything?
Well, concerns were expressed by the vice president, I think, or incoming president of SAA with respect to the ripple effect. If we deviated from the agreement, the impact on future budget decisions. So I think there would be some impact, and it would raise the question of if an agreement is made and the board pivots on that for any group at any time, then what's the point of doing the bargaining? And I do think that's an opportunity for us, to the earlier point of starting the board's prioritization and values in August and not waiting till later in the game. It helps avoid that concern.
Sure. So thanks. I just want to make sure, I mean, I would love if we could fund that. I'm trying to. I just want to make sure there are no unintended consequences if we do that. So thank you for sharing.
Ms. Werner?
Thank you, and I appreciate your comments, Mr. Sharkey. When we were presented with the IBN documents, I believe it was actually on consent agenda, being presented and then giving some feedback, and it's not that we're turning away what they said in some offensive way, it's just, we hear different things from the community, and we want to honor that, and we want to do what is best for our students and our staff. So I think it is important that we keep them, and as we heard tonight, there's also issues with the pay and the insurance, and so it's problematic with what's happening with the funding. So we have to look at where the money is being spent and be able to pull back in areas where it's not a need, where it's more of a luxury than a need, and our staff are a need, and we have to put them first.
All right, I would like to thank,
one more.
are we good?
I have
Excuse
one
me, go
more.
ahead, one more.
So one of the things that came up in the last discussion, and it was related to the stipends and the special ed. So what was not discussed was that there's these significant stipends going out at a undetermined amount of number, but the teachers are being reduced by 1, and students are being increased by 3 in the lower schools and 5 in the high schools. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I don't know is that okay? I'm being told that's accurate.
Okay, and so that just was not told to us, and so you're actually putting a higher workload on the staff, and it's my understanding that some of them said they would rather forego the stipend and have less students.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. Thank you so much for the opportunity. So when we wrote a proposal to all of the special educators, it was really around the elimination and eradication of contracted services, which we know is a large cost, and also eroding some of the service quality at the teams for our students and families. And so when we put it out in a survey to all of the staff, we definitely heard a larger majority saying, yes, please, the stipends. But you are right, there were certain individuals, there was a handful of people who said, nope, we want lower amounts of students on our caseload than the stipends, but it was a much larger majority that asked for the stipends, and I'd be happy to share that survey feedback with you as well. I think it's linked in that B memo, but I can put it at the top of your inbox. And so you are right, there were definitely teachers saying, like, I would forego the stipends if it meant I could have fewer kids.
Thank you.
All right, first of all, Shannon, thank you for your extraordinary amount of work to take us through a Budget 101 review, as well as an orientation to where we are live and over time. You can hear the shared desire by the board to look at another series of options, possibly. I'm so sorry, I was closing.
Go ahead.
No, I'm closing, you go ahead.
Well, no, all I'm going to say is I want to go on record as well as, how frustrating it is to maybe regroup and look at keeping our assistant principals. But I stand with that standing with the communities that are asking us to keep their assistant principals. I want to be on record as well.
Any other comments before I close?
Well, there's one more slide.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry, but it'll be really fast. It's a good slide.
Oh, no.
It's a good thing.
It's a good
412
thing.
more things.
I know. We have a really long meeting.
Okay.
This is really, I wanted to end on a positive note and talk about just the investments that we are really trying to make in our students. So this just kind of gave a look at some of the great program opportunities, and I talked a lot about security costs. So just putting in there that we really are trying to make sure that we're investing. These programs I know are things that bring kids into our schools, so they're important to us, but they're also, things to keep in mind as great things we do, but also great things that have costs associated with them. So I'll stop at that.
Thank you. We'll go to our next agenda item now. I had a really lovely closing, but I'm going to stop.
Sorry.
That's all right. And I just thank the board so much for the maturity in our conversation, our willingness to be learners, sharing our priorities and values, and asking good questions as we orient ourselves to this year-long process that hopefully can turn into a 4-year-long process for us as we become creatively forward on the ways we want to, strategize our expenditures. So thank you very much to everyone. All right, we're on first read for board policy JLIF regarding sex offender notification.
Board President Lewis, members of the board, Dr. Menzel and Ms. Wagner, Vice President Sharkey. I'm going to be brief on this. This is a first read by board policy. Anytime you're going to adopt an amendment to a policy, we have a first read and then we bring it back for a second read. This is a first read. This is a compliance read. It is adding the underlying language there, which is directly from ARS 133825. The current policy requires that the school district take steps to display sex offender information when they are at these current risk levels of 2, which is a mid-risk, or level 3, which is high risk. State law, that statute I just stated, now requires that the notice to schools be at level 1 for specific offenders, and those are level 1 offenders which are low risk, but that have been convicted of a dangerous crime against children, which is a statutory term that has a whole litany of criminal offenses under that statute definition. So our policy will just change that. We still receive the notice based on, it comes from law enforcement. What it does is affects, our requirement is in our regulation, JLIFR, states what we do once we receive that notice. And just to note, JLIFR, the regulation, states that an adult registered sex offender, and it says any adult registered sex offender, not just those that I just mentioned, may not be present on school property except under certain circumstances. And even if they are present, the offender must notify the principal and must at all times remain under direct supervision. So that's already part of our regulation, and that's what we will enforce if the issue comes up on campus. Are there any questions at this time?
Seeing none, thank you for the introduction of it, and we'll look forward to any comments coming forward if we need to make any adjustments or ask any other questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Moving on to 6D, discussion of governing board email regarding governingboard@susd.org.
This was at the request of Ms. Carney with respect to the govboard.org email. General Counsel has done some research in terms of what other districts do. And I don't know, Nick, if you want to share kind of your review of this, the status and why this is a practice that was in place before I got to Scottsdale, and Council has reviewed that from a legal perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel, Governing Board. First, the request, I believe, from Ms. Carney was that certain members that were emailing the Gov Board address may not know who was actually receiving the email. So the first thing we did was go to the website, and if you're going to click on that, it now states who that email goes to. So anybody seeing that would see that it's going to Superintendent, Mrs. Wagner, and myself, General Counsel. We're actually going to update that after something we learned today. The Kyrene Elementary School District has a notice describing in a little more detail sort of the open meeting law potentiality of sending a governing board group an email and what you can expect to receive in return. Regarding the way that the governing board email address is stated, the address that this district utilizes assists in the efficient processing of important district work. To remove the superintendent, the executive assistant, and legal counsel would needlessly slow down processing. The benefits outweigh the consequences. First, board members by statute are not employees. Members have no individual responsibility for responding to issues in a timely manner. Employees on contract, however, do. If a board member receives an email and responds that they will look into it, board members are urged to notify a staff member, which is often what happens. That's pretty much the process. What does the public do if the board member fails to resolve an issue or doesn't respond? Does the district sustain a loss if a complaint is not investigated? Can the public hold them accountable? Only once every 4 years. School districts need accountability today, not in 4 years. This is why you have the superintendent, counsel, and executive assistant on the email chain, so that the employees that are responsible for handling the day-to-day fulfill their contractual duties and review the items that are emailed to the board. The board oversees that work and holds the superintendent and legal counsel accountable for the day-to-day. Second, every email provided to the board is a public record. The community must know that when they communicate with the board by email, they are creating a public record. The board president should forward all emails of district concern to the superintendent so that this public business can be investigated. The idea that the board should limit who sees their emails is antithetical to transparency. It is a bad idea for efficiency, and it needlessly puts the district at risk. Many other districts do not have a governing board email address for the exact reason that it puts the district at risk of liability, open meeting law, or otherwise. My advice as your attorney is to keep it with the superintendent and his assistant at a minimum as a mitigating function. To do otherwise creates risk for the district. Thank you.
Ms. Carney?
Thank you. So my problem with this was that there's been no transparency about this. I mean, I've been on the board over 2 years and never knew that anyone outside of the 5 elected board members were attached to that email address. And I think that's the issue, is that we were never told, and like you said, the community has never been told, and I think it's just a lack of transparency. I'm a little confused on what the issue is with us not being employees. Is that what you?
I've been on the governing board email address since I started in September of '23. To your first point, If you scroll over the governing board SUSD address, it shows who's on that address. So I will point out that certain email systems may not have that functionality, but for many, that is very transparent when you click and hover over that address list. To your point, or to your question, the governing board, this governing board, is very intent on being responsive to the community. I'm not here insulting the governing board, but the point is that having Dr. Menzel, who is attached to his phone and his watch and his, multiple phones and his computer 24/7, look after, respond to all board members and respond to the community and set agenda items is what an employee, a superintendent, is supposed to do. There is no individual responsibility of a board member. You don't have to wake up tomorrow and respond to any emails. You can take the day off. If I do that, I have to take a vacation day by contract. That's my point.
Okay, so my ask was that the governing board email just have no employees attached. So if we need to remove that email address and just use our individual, then maybe we need to go that route.
Sorry, can you clarify? Your suggestion is just ask people to select the individual names they want
Well,
to
that's what
email?
most districts do. They don't have the combined. Otherwise, just keep the 5 elected board members that are meant to be on that email. Like I said, my problem is that no one ever voiced that. No one ever said it. I didn't know I was to hover over it and look at who was on there. I never knew that Gladys was added to it. I just think it's more work that they don't need all those things that we receive. They don't need to be getting in their inbox as well as us. So.
I'll just say from my standpoint, I disagree. I think the openness is fine. It's all public record, like General Counsel said. I don't think there's a problem if someone doesn't know. I love that we put notification on the site saying this goes to these people. So I think that's a great solution for it. I think we've already spent enough time talking that it's worth, because I just don't think it's problematic. So I'm glad you brought it up, but I would rather we just go with the changes that were made.
Okay, well, one last thing I'd like to know is anyone monitoring our individual district emails? Okay.
Dr. Potensky?
I would just add, I was also surprised, and the way I learned is I forwarded you something, and you said I already got it. So I would echo the call for transparency, like in going through orientation, for example. We have this mechanism, the community reaches out. You don't need to also forward it to me because I'm also getting it. That said, I think all of the reasons for it make sense to me, and I feel more protected knowing that council is involved and that district is involved than the alternative. And my concern about getting rid of it is then people do start selectively emailing board members, and then we start to fracture the feedback that we're getting from the community, and I don't think that's a good outcome either.
Any other comments? Thank you. All right, discussion of adjustment to SUSD proportionate share plan.
Leah Mitchell and Dr. Williams are prepared to provide a very quick overview of proportionate share and kind of where we are with respect to concerns that were raised during public comment at our last meeting.
Yes, and so very quick, I'll just turn over to Dr. Williams, but express gratitude to the families who are working with us directly, expressing concerns around new changes they'd like to see. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Williams to recount how we're tackling that this year and plans for the future.
Good evening. So I'm here to talk a little bit about proportionate share. So proportionate share is a proportion of our IDEA funds that are given to the district to help support students that are placed, parentally placed in a private school system that is a nonprofit school that is within our district boundaries. There's some different rules for schools that are for-profit versus nonprofit. It's the nonprofit schools that are within our boundaries that we're responsible for. So we're responsible for both child find as well as providing equitable services to those students that that parents have placed in a private school system. Child find, it's our obligation to provide a psychologist to be able to respond to parent requests for evaluation, school requests for evaluation. Mind you, none of those costs are covered under proportionate shares. Those are covered from district funds. The other thing that we are obligated to provide is individual service plans. So those individual service plans provide special education services to students in private schools. Currently, our plan has students and families coming to the school district to receive those services at the school that is closest to their private school, so that they can receive any services, occupational therapy, speech therapy, reading, writing, math, from our qualified professionals in Scottsdale. There was some families that were unhappy with that offer of service, and so we've been working with that family to look at other services, other districts that provide proportionate share plans. So we've been doing that. We've looked at a couple different districts around the valley and seen what they are doing. And we are currently working with that specific family to kind of pilot a program so that we can provide vendor services to that family. So we are working with vendors. We have to work with the vendors to get all of their paperwork. We have to work with finance to open up codes so that we can pay those vendors. We have to amend the grant to move money over. Vendor money comes out of a different part of the grant than paying our teachers. So we've been working on all of those pieces, and we'll be ready to put that into place for this particular family early next week. We're already working with that vendor. So we're doing that as a pilot to kind of see what we need to do. The next step is that we have to have a consultation meeting. So those consultation meetings happen twice a year. We will meet with our families that are in homeschools and private schools. We will talk about what our plan looks like now, some of the proposals for moving forward, and whether or not families feel comfortable moving forward with changing that plan. We have heard from a few families that they enjoy the plan that we have and they don't want us to change it. So at that consultation meeting, we'll kind of work through what that looks like for families.
And so we're happy to answer any additional questions, but really pursuing just the most optionality for families who are pursuing private education but still have students with special needs.
Mr. Sharkey?
Looking at the Arizona Department of Ed, it said that families who go to private not-for-profit are eligible for proportionate share, but if they send their child to a private for-profit, they're not. Is that true, and do we have a separation?
That's not true. So families that go to a nonprofit school within our boundaries, they're our obligation. Parents that go to a for-profit school in our boundaries, it's the obligation of where the parent lives. So if the parent lives in the Paradise Valley School District, but their for-profit is in Scottsdale, then PV would take care of it.
Okay. Just from looking at the Department of Ed, it said if it's a for-profit, they're not eligible for proportionate share. So that's not the case?
Typically for child find, we still have obligation for child find. So we still have to evaluate those students, but we're not obligated to pay for proportionate share funding. Sorry. We
Okay.
do have a child find obligation, just not we don't have to provide a service plan. You're right.
Of the number of students we serve, how many are at not-for-profit versus for-profit about?
I don't know. I would have to do the math on that with our proportionate share psychologist because we only have to do plans for the students that are at the nonprofits, and we do have a very low number of students that we typically provide plans for. We have 3 this year.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you so very much. Sorry, Amy?
Can you see me or no?
I do now.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Just a couple questions. Thank you for the board memo you did send to us with some of the facts on there. And I got a question on that. Wondering if you submitted waivers to ADE when the proportionate share funds were unspent year after year.
Yep, so I can only speak to the last few years that I've been in the position. So for the last 2 years, we have requested a waiver from ADE. So we're allowed to request a portion of those funds back. We don't get all of them, and ADE chooses whether or not to waive them. We have to prove that we've done our proportionate share meetings. We have to prove that we've reached out to our families. We have to prove that we've offered plans that parents have refused. So we document all of that. We turn it into the ADE, and they determine whether or not to waive that money, which then goes back into our IDEA funds that help us to pay for the psychologist for child find that we're not able to pay for out of proportionate share funds and other things like that.
Okay, I just asked if you could maybe update the B memo with that information and that would be great to further that information. Thank you.
Any other comments? Thank you so much. That brings us to consent agenda item 7L. And what I've been asked is just to simply remove it. But I know
Not the whole thing, just that one
just
portion.
say it out loud.
So the 2025-26 extra duty and additional hour supplementals is not complete. And so we want to remove that from the salary schedules. The other things are accurate and complete. The supplemental is not, and so we want to remove that before it's approved.
So we want to approve L minus the
The-
extra duty and additional hour supplement.
For 25-26.
Okay, and then Ms. Carney also had a concern about maybe pulling this. Was that the same concern you had?
I have a lot of concerns, but no, that, I have additional
Okay.
on that. So how are we going?
We're not making a motion yet, so let's just hear
Okay,
what
so
your
just have
thoughts
it-
are. Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to talk about the 2025-26, the certified teacher, social worker, and the nurse schedule. Sorry, there's a lot of them on here.
I heard social worker, nurse, and
The
certified teacher.
Right, so let me find where that's at on here. But I just want to state that before our last board meeting, I had requested data on the special ed stipends that were given over the past 3 years, the amounts, and then inquired if the employee was still working in that position in the district. I also asked how many stipends of each amount would be offered and what was the budget impact. And I asked for why we believe stipends are working for us for retaining employees, and I still have not received this information. But those stipends are listed on the 25-26 certified teacher, social worker, and nurse schedule because it was approved by the board last meeting. I did not approve that, so I'm not going to be able to approve this. But there's another issue I have with this, and it's that we're continuing to use the language of consecutive years of experience instead of total years of service for an SUSD certified employee. And I brought this up last year because we have teachers that have had to take a leave for various circumstances, and they're penalized when they have to start over when they come back to work in the district. And so I would like someone to explain why, if our goal is to retain and attract dedicated teachers, why do we continue to do it this way?
Sorry, Member Governing Board President Lewis, Member Carney. This has been an operating procedure in the district for many, many years, and I believe it has gone through the IBN process, but it is certainly something we can take a look at if the Governing Board so desires.
Okay, if you could, have you not heard that feedback from teachers? Because we have as board members.
We have heard that, but there is a fiscal impact to making that change.
Right.
So that is one of the reasons why it has not been brought forward.
Okay. Well, I would just encourage us to look at that. If we are, one of our goals is to attract and retain our dedicated employees, I think this is a way to show them that. And I had a question on when does a teacher's consecutive years begin?
When they enter the district,
On the hire date?
yes.
On the hire date? Okay, that's all I have on that item, but I did, we did receive an item or an email on the guidance counselor schedule, and I forwarded that on saying, we received an email from one of our high school counselors saying that NSCS should say NCSC for National Certified School Counselor Certificate. And I did email that to some of you, to Dr. Menzel, and I think to Dr. Cruz, and so I'm not sure.
Is that a typo?
Yes, and
Member
we can
Carney,
make
yes.
that correction so that it
Yes.
properly reflects that.
Properly noted. Thank you so much for bringing it to our attention.
Okay, well, thank you to the counselor for bringing it
Yes.
to our attention. So when we are approving that tonight, it will be with the corrected.
Correct. The right 4 letters in the right order.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I'll make
Well,
a motion. I'm sorry.
comment was also that it's a credential that should be valued in the salary schedule. So I don't know, I mean, obviously, we shouldn't just be reacting to a decontextualized email. But I think it wasn't just the typo. Part of the typo was also making sure that that credential was kind of valued and recognized in the schedule.
And that was the intent from the language. I just think we had the wrong letters.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I will make the motion to approve consent agenda item L with the removal of the extra duty and additional hours supplement, otherwise as presented with the, for 25-26, with the correction to the counselor certification acronym.
Second the motion.
Okay, let's do a roll call, if you don't mind, please. Dr. Potensky?
Aye.
Ms. Warner?
Aye.
Okay, Ms. Carney?
No.
Mr. Sharkey?
Aye.
And I'm an aye, so it's a 4-1 pass, and thank you for bringing it up because it's still a worthy conversation. All right, and then that last part will be brought to us. Okay, I am of the mind that we might need a 5-minute stand-up break. Does anybody else need it? No? You want to keep moving? Okay, let's keep moving. We're on. I love it. Let's keep going. All right, item 8, action items, board action required. We have almost 10 items, I think, here. So we'll start with the acceptance of the audit and compliance questionnaire for fiscal year that was presented earlier.
Do we need to accept the rest of the consent agenda?
No, we did that already, before, yeah, thank you. So I typically take a motion and then discussion, so forgive me when I start that way. What discussion do you have? Okay, I need a motion
I'll move.
to accept the audit compliance questionnaire as presented.
Correct.
Okay, we need a second.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm going to stop you. We have to do a roll call on this one.
Oh, thank you.
Yep,
Roll call.
sorry.
Aye.
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 Aye, 5-0. Thank you. Second read and approval of the secondary science curriculum adoption for 25-26.
There's not an updated presentation, but if board members have any questions, we have staff here to answer those questions. Otherwise, we recommend approval.
I move that we approve as presented.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, employee insurance update and authorization for employee insurance RFP scope, development, and review or trust review.
So while there are a lot of slides that were presented to the governing board in advance, I've asked Shannon not to go through all those in detail. She has one she wants to talk about, and then anything that you have questions about before we talk about next steps. But as you know, this is a very important issue for our employees. It's a very important issue for administration. It's a very challenging issue, and so we do want to give it the time that it deserves, but want to focus on the questions that matter most to you. Shannon?
And the community has access to the slides.
Yes, it's on board docs.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to roll through these ones that just show what's happened. I think this is really important. We reached out or contacted other districts to figure out what are they contributing towards the insurance plans for their staff, and how do we compare on that? And the reason I think that's really important to think about is, as we have heard and we know, the cost to employees for insurance and the premiums that they're having to pay are pretty high. Part of that comes down to how are we contributing as a district to medical cost or medical insurance as compared to other districts. And I think this tells a compelling story of when we started looking at our peer districts or districts that are in our close vicinity, we realized that we are, and I know we are putting $1 million towards that this next year, so that helps some, but we are really on an average woefully below what a lot of our other districts are. So I know it's a really hard thing of, do you put money into salaries? Do you put money into medical? We'd like to do, in a perfect world, both. But the financial constraints that we're in don't always allow for that to happen. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, is when we are looking at, the medical insurance, yes, there's the claims issue. Yes, there's an issue of it's just expensive. But there's also, I think, an issue that we have to address of we're just not contributing what other districts are when it comes to insurance. And to even get up to that middle average, we'd really have to be contributing $2 to $3 million more on top of the million we just put into that. So I think that's why I wanted to touch on the slide to really show us when you look at an average, we're just not doing as much as other districts are, and that plays a big role in those premiums for our staff members.
Questions from the board, comments? Ms. Werner?
Thank you. So just for the community, where does this money come from? That the district puts towards this?
M&O. Well, primarily M&O. I mean, if you are paid out of like food services or a grant, the grant is responsible for paying for the medical for that person.
Okay. So, my first insight to this was in how challenging the insurance for our district is and how it really hurts our staff. It was my first meeting, agenda setting meeting with Dr. Menzel and Julie Sanowski at the time, and he had just had a meeting related to insurance. And when I walked in, there were 3 things on the table, one of them being Blue Cross Blue Shield, which I had under an education system at the time. And I shared that this is a good plan, it's reasonable, and Dr. Menzel said, well, we would have to hire an administrator. And I will say, back in '23, you know, we might have looked a little different today if we had hired an administrator at that point. Because as you stated in the audit committee, we pay Kairos $500,000, $500,000 in administrative costs every year for insurance. So I brought this forward because what we're doing just isn't sustainable. And I do know that other districts are doing a better job than us. Which is why I asked for the RFP to either go out to direct, like a Cigna, like a Blue Cross, and even Valley Schools is doing better right now than we are for our staff. And they're leaving, and so it totally goes against everything that we have for our strategic plan.
Absolutely. I will share. We did do, it is in here, we did do a RFP 2 years ago. Blue Cross Blue Shield did not respond. We're happy. We have reached out to, to do an RFP for medical is so beyond the scope. They're very detailed in what that scope looks like, and then even evaluating all the materials that come in. So we did reach out to a number of companies that help with this process. We were hoping to have quotes in time to be able to make a recommendation tonight. What we found is when we said, hey, can you give us this within like a week's time, they all said we can't really respond to that. In addition, I did start meeting with Valley Schools November timeframe, November, December of this year. We're still talking. One of the things is I do want us, I think for me to come to the board and to go to our employees and say we're going to change insurance companies, I want to have assurances that it is actually going to save money for the district. So we're still working through that process with Valley Schools, as well as we did reach out and ask for quotes. I was on a presentation the other day from the state Department of Administration on what the state plan looks like. There's pros and cons to that. One concern is that you have to contribute the same amount that the state does, which is less than what our employees are paying, which is great for our employees, but you have to pay all the claims too that come in. So there could be costs associated at the back end. So we are continuing to look at all of those options, and we know that some districts are on direct contract and we know some are on trusts.
And in your RFP on the agenda item, it shows a cost between $0 to $200,000, and it's you have a direct or another trust. And so when you put that RFP out, one, are you updating the one you did before, so it's a little less work? And B, are you going out for both, so it's not going to just turn into one more trust, which clearly is not working for our district?
So the last time we did it for both, we would. My expectation is we would do both again.
Okay.
I would like. It's a really long process. It took us 10 months the last time. I would like to have a little bit more detail in there on some things, like the administrative costs. Like if we were to, what does it look like if we were to do this? Would we need to hire an administrator or TPA to be able to cover that for us, and what does that look like? So I think we can do where it covers both, like we did before, but I think we can also, I'm hopeful that we could do a little bit better scope. And a little bit more help with reviewing it. There's a lot to review.
Dr. Potensky?
You mentioned the state option. Assuming the state doesn't respond to an RFP, does the firm that we work with include them so they are also lined up with the other options?
They would never respond. It's just a decision we would have to make is if we want to go with them or not. A lot of it,
Well, the firm that I think you said we were going to use a firm
we can
to
either go.
manage the RFP process.
Yeah.
Would we ask of them to include in their comparison the state option?
Yes, we could ask them to analyze the costs that are submitted through an RFP and how that would compare with what the state option would be for us so that we can see if there's a
Thank you.
benefit to the state option. Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Ms. Warren? Anybody else have questions? All right, I need a motion.
I motion we move forward. I know, I'm not saying exactly as I'm supposed to.
You move forward with issuing an RFP,
Right,
correct?
issuing an RFP
Yeah.
is what I meant to say.
You want me to issue it? Issue the motion? Okay. I move that we authorize the employee insurance RFP scope and development as presented. Second? Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Potensky. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, yeah. We do it differently in different places. Okay, approval of transition of listed positions to non-exempt status.
There's not a formal well, there may be a formal presentation. Is an opportunity to ask questions that you have with respect to the reclassification required as a result of identified challenges with the City of Scottsdale HR Audit number 2.
What questions does the board have?
Could you explain to the community what it means to be exempt and non-exempt?
Absolutely. I will give you a very high level. Thank you, Member Warner. To be exempt means that you are a salaried employee and that you do not basically punch a time clock. You are exempt from the time and hour and the wage laws with regards to Fair Labor Standards Act. To be non-exempt means that you are on a time clock, and we try to hold you to your hourly, your weekly hours that are allocated through FTE, and if they go above their 40, then they are due overtime.
And what are the benefits of being exempt versus non-exempt?
Well, you can look at positives and negatives on both sides, correct? So if you're an exempt employee, you're not punching a time clock, you're not looking at that. However, I mean, if you look at just myself, I'm working all the time, so I'm not punching a time clock, but you work whenever the work is needed to be done. As for an employee that is non-exempt, then they answer more to a time clock. Obviously, we can be a little bit flexible with that, but we do things such as we try to flex their time, et cetera. But we also want to honor their time, because if they go above their 40 hours, we do owe them overtime, and we want to make sure that they get that overtime.
Okay, thank you. And just one more question. When it came to the senior executive assistants, and did our fabulous secretary also get moved to a non-exempt?
No, she actually meets the test for a Fair Labor Standards Act.
Just recently?
Yes.
Okay, when was that changed?
It will be changed in this coming year.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Potensky?
The individuals who are moving from exempt to non-exempt, they know this, right? They do know this. I've had personal conversations with both them and their supervisors. I understand this is technical. Have any of them expressed concern that under FLSA that's not the proper judgment? Some of them have, most definitely. And so how does that get adjudicated, or basically we make our best interpretation So and that's what sticks? Thank you, Dr. Patinsky. I'm going to defer to our legal counsel. Thank you.
Madam President, Dr. Patinsky, there is no appeal process for this. So once the decision is made by the board, the employees would move to the non-exempt status if the board moves in that direction. But I have reviewed all of the communications for any employee who has voiced a concern, or if their supervisor voiced a concern, and have evaluated the concerns that were raised and would still stand by the recommendation that you move these 17 positions into the non-exempt.
And so if they continue to not agree, then their remedy is to
Well-
file a complaint with, do they have any remedies?
They don't have any internal remedies,
Yeah,
sir,
external
under the
remedies.
Scottsdale Unified School District. They could have an external remedy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I move that we approve the
Madam President?
Sorry?
There is a decision point for the governing board within this item. Dr. Cruz answered the question that Ms. Warner presented, which is there any differentiation between non-exempt and exempt? Under your classification system, the non-exempt employees are considered to be, or the exempt employees are considered to be administrators, and therefore they're entitled to different benefits when you pay out for vacation and pay out for general leave. So it's the district administration's recommendation and mine that you authorize what's listed as option 1 in your agenda, which is a fixed cost, to make those employees whole, so that moving into the 24-25 school year, they would adhere to the benefits of the non-exempt position, rather than option 2, which would leave that carryover forward, grandfather them in, so to speak, and require the HR system to manage those 17 employees differently.
Ms. Carney?
And we also couldn't control for costs at that point.
Okay, thank you. I have two things. On the board memo that we received on March 27th, I just saw in there that it's linked to a copy of a letter that each affected employee will receive. And it said this letter will come to the governing board for approval at the meeting, yet I don't see that on the agenda item.
Madam President, Ms. Carney, that letter was drafted by me just for a support for your district. It wouldn't need to necessarily be approved by the board. What you would need to approve tonight is the revisions to the job descriptions that are within your agenda item, and how you would like to treat the allocation of benefits under either option 1, payout now, the differentials, option 2, allow them to grandfather forward.
Okay, perfect. And then just for the public, could you talk about, there is one employee on here, correct, that are not moving to non-exempt. The social workers are not moving to non-exempt, even though this agenda item says approval of transition of listed positions to non-exempt status. We do have one that is not moving to non-exempt that's listed here.
Madam President, Ms. Carney, you're correct that the social worker is not the district administration's recommendation at this time that the social workers move to a non-exempt status. And you have received legal advice on that topic as well. And Dr. Cruz has some additional information she'd like to share.
Member Carney, thank you for the question and clarification. The reason social workers are on there and their job descriptions are attached as a part of this review, we had to do a deep dive to make this work. So therefore, we need to update their job description to reflect the correct pieces. So a master's degree required with social work preferred.
Yes, thank you. I know you've given us a lot of information, but the public doesn't have that, and it doesn't read that way on the agenda item. So
Yeah, I think that the motion should be more precise to account for that. I think it's a good point, Amy.
thank you.
Mr. Sharkey?
On option 1, option 2, what's the financial impact, if any, between them, and how material is it? And I realize that a lot of it is future dated because it has to do with paying them vacation when they terminated a future date, so I understand it's not an easy number, but is there any sort of,
Mr. Sharkey, our calculation as of today, now people will continue to accrue leave through the end of this fiscal year. Option one to pay out will be a total of, let me find the correct one, I apologize.
Yeah, back to the supervisory role of the administrative assistant that is now remaining exempt. Is it accurate that we just approved her salary to go up from 77,000 to 103,000?
Whose salary? No, no.
Okay.
All right, so, Mr. Sharkey, do you have any comments?
Clinical
sorry.
I'm sorry, clinical technical systems coordinator? What position is that? Coordinator, technical systems, clinical services coordinator?
That is in our support services.
Okay, thank you.
Ms.
I
Warner,
apologize.
anything else? I see your
I'm
light's still on. Okay, that's right. Mr. Sharkey, just, this is clear as mud to me right now.
so
So
I-
I'm trying to weave out, what are we actually
Here we
going
go.
to make a recommendation?
Thank you, Mr. Sharkey, for your patience. Our total for option one for the payout would be $169,105.50 as of when we calculated this and got it into our board documents. The total liability for option two is just unknown at this time, as we're not sure when employees will
it's a
leave the
future liability,
district.
right? And I see
Okay.
that memo here. Thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you.
So as I understand the trade-off, we take the cost now, but we can manage everyone consistently on one system going forward.
So which one is being advised?
So we're recommending option one because it's fixed and it's clean, and so then you're treating all of the employees under a classified designation with the same benefit structure and package, and so the accounting of that
Okay.
is clean. It becomes very difficult when you have grandfathering provisions over time, then you have changes in HR, and somebody doesn't remember who got grandfathered for what, and it just opens up a lot of concerns. That's why I recommend option one. I think the motion needs to approve the reclassification with the exception of social workers, the revised job descriptions, and then identify option one or option two.
I make a motion that we approve the transition of listed positions to non-exempt with the exception of social workers under the Fair Labor Standards Act, and we approve the job descriptions as presented in option one.
I second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
aye. That was good. That was tough. And thanks for giving us the detail of options. Okay, let me get back to my original page here. Okay, we are on 8E, approval of updates to Kids Club for 25-26 school year.
So Dr. Bono, I think, is still here to answer any questions you may have. The recommendation and the supporting documentations were included in the board packet.
Seeing none? I recommend we approve updates to Kids Club for 25-26 as presented.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, as we look at 8F, consideration of State 48 Public Affairs Lobbying Services Agreement.
So for the past year and a half, almost 2 years, we've been working with State 48 Public Affairs for lobbying services for Scottsdale Unified School District. There was a 3-year period of time where the district did not pay for that support, but in an email that Shannon sent to the governing board from the fiscal year 08-09 through 18-19, the district had paid for lobbying support at the Capitol. Many other districts do this, especially larger school districts, to ensure their voice is heard with respect to public education policy and funding at the Capitol in Phoenix. The rate that we're being charged compared to what the district used to pay is much less in many instances, and it's definitely less than what many of our sister districts are paying across the valley for that same level of support. You heard earlier tonight from the SEA representatives the importance of advocacy. So my recommendation is that the board continue authorizing expenditure of this in order to ensure that our voice and the needs of our staff are represented at the Capitol.
Board comments? Board questions? Ms. Warner? Ms. Carney?
Thank you, President Lewis. Yeah, I brought this forward because instead of always talking about us cutting positions, last meeting I had given a few ideas of where we might find some budget savings. And this is one of the things I mentioned, and I didn't necessarily see this becoming an action item. I hoped it was something that the superintendent could just look into doing. But nevertheless, it's here as an action item. So I just want to state that since 2010, we've lost We've lost 6,300 students. So the chart that the board received from Dr. Menzel and Ms. Crozier showing how we've used lobbyists in the past, I think is tone deaf to the reality that we're now having to make budget cuts of things that are not necessary and vital to student learning. Spending taxpayer dollars on multiple lobbyist contracts while cutting assistant principals to half-time along with other positions in our schools is unacceptable. And it might have been fine to have a lobbyist when we were in better financial shape, but enrollment is down to 19,874 right now. So we have to tighten the reins in M&O. And this is one easy way that I see to do that. And I would like to state that Policy DB says that the superintendent is directed to formulate the annual budget, considering at all times the resources must be used to produce the most positive effect on the student's opportunity to gain an education. So I make a motion to cancel this contract with State 48 Public Affairs to free up this M&O funding so that we can use toward our school site budgets.
I'm going to second that motion, and I have some comments.
Go ahead, Ms.
Thank you.
Warner.
So this is one of those items that would fall under a luxury during these times that we need to rein things in so we can redirect those funds to our teachers and the people that are hands-on with our students. We also belong to Arizona School Board Association, Arizona Administrator Association, which has 3 lobbyists, one inside, one internal, and Dr. Menzel is in communication with them regularly. We have the Arizona School Board Association, which we also pay for membership. They have a lobbyist, and then we have the GUPPIMAC, which is next. So how many lobbyists does one district have to have? And considering that you have relationships with people at the Capitol that you can utilize, and I think this is an absolute unnecessity at this point due to the financial situation that this district is in, and we need to redirect these funds to our students and staff.
Mr. Sharkey?
I was going to bring up ASBA as well. I mean, I'm new to this, and I get emails from ASBA, and I see the lobbying angle, and I appreciate you bringing it up, Ms. Warner. From your side, Superintendent, is it somewhat equitable that the impact we get, and again, I don't know what impact, direct or indirect, we get from State 48, but are we getting some of that through the ASBA relationship?
So here's the challenge. I think it's a really good question. ASBA represents all the school boards that are members of ASBA across the state. So their needs and interests may be different. We have very small rural and remote schools. We have schools on reservations. We have large and urban schools. So when they take a position on a policy, it's representing the common denominator amongst all of those, which means there might be things that would not benefit Scottsdale, but would benefit some other schools. And so oftentimes they don't take a position because they don't want to get crosswise with what an impact might be for a district like Scottsdale compared to some small rural district. When you look at some of the other organizations that we participate with, that's part of the challenge. So the advantage to having someone that's dedicated to Scottsdale is that they're representing our interest at the Capitol. State 48 in particular was very instrumental in getting the $250,000 appropriation for the actuarial study on the potential for school districts to participate in the healthcare system at the state level. We would not have been in a position to advocate for that if we didn't have a dedicated person to do so. There are a number of other areas where she has been lobbying on our behalf for legislation that would benefit our district. arguably would benefit others. But what you lose when you solely rely on the aggregate lobbyist is the district-specific concerns being expressed by someone who's representing our interests at the Capitol.
So I appreciate that, and understand there is some benefits. I'm not saying, but, given the, how much blood is everybody giving, I don't want to sit here and make a decision because I'm not the one that has to live with the impact directly. How painful would it be if we said no and didn't have the resources of a lobbyist firm?
So I think the bottom line is that our voice in terms of policy would be weakened, but not eliminated.
Okay. And Ms. Warner, don't want to put you in the spot, but we're in a wonderful position of having you on the board. Feel free to abstain, but is there any benefit in your position in being part of this that we could take advantage of?
Feel free to call me anytime. I'm happy to give input on any bill.
If you can give me your number, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely, anytime.
But,
You can
seriously,
even come visit.
But is that something that we have going on? So, that
Absolutely.
does make up for some of the loss. Again, not a straight apples to apples, but I do want to recognize that we're fortunate to have that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So first of all, I very much, even though I'm about to disagree, I respect the logic behind putting this motion forward, so I want to explain why I would disagree. And it's for two reasons. One is a little bit more of a process question. I would guess that there are thousands of $36,000 contracts that are in the district. And so I'm concerned about us engaging in a budgeting process where we select, out of context, different items and then weigh in on them. To me, that's a concerning precedent. And I could find, again, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, $36,000 expenses that I would also argue are probably not as important out of context to paying teachers more or any of the other things that we care about. But budgets are ultimately more holistic than that. They're more trade-offs. They're more comprehensive. So there's a little bit of a precedent concern that I have. And then the second, I wish we didn't have to do this, just as I wish our principals didn't have to act as like salespeople. But we are in a competitive market. And the schools that we compete against, they have lobbyists. And those lobbyists are pursuing policies that, which I respect, create a playing field that work to their advantage. So I do feel like Scottsdale, I don't view this as an expense, I view it as an investment. And I view it as an investment because it has the potential to ensure a more even competitive playing field, if not unlocking additional resources to the district.
I would actually disagree with you at this point, Dr. Patinsky. We're in a time where we need all the resources we can go to our staff. And Dr. Menzel is in regular communication with Rebecca Beebe, who does the same thing that State 48 does. And they actually, I do believe they share that, and there's an additional lobbyist with that, and who's actually a parent in our district. So you have access to have lobbying from these individuals on the same things that are important to the district. And I know that for a fact because I talk to them. So being that we belong to these other organizations, that you have access to their lobbyists directly, I think that that's what we should go with. And for this year, we eliminate one and we put that money towards our students and staff, and then we can revisit this again next year. That is what's fiscally prudent and it's what's responsible, and it's also showing good faith to our staff that we are doing everything we can to take care of them. So, thank you.
Any other comments, questions? All right, the motion on the table is to not renew the lobbying services of, or continue the lobbying services of State 48. There was a motion and a second. We'll do a roll call vote on this one. Dr. Patinsky?
Nay.
Ms. Warner?
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
And nay. Okay, so we're at a 3-2 on it not passing. I would like to follow up with a perhaps future report from our State 48 Public Affairs Office to talk about the various impacts she's had in this last session.
We can get that on an agenda.
Thank you. And then maybe revisit. All right, back to G, 8G. Consideration of Greater Phoenix Educational Management Council and Arizona Education Management Council. It's also known as GUPPY-MAC. Did I miss something? Okay, sorry. GUPPY-MAC, also known as GUPPY-MAC Intergovernmental Agreement for the 23-28 school year.
This is an agreement that the governing board, an intergovernmental agreement, the governing board approved last year with a 5-year agreement span, but with a 90-day notice if the board wanted to exit. I do want to make a technical point of clarification in the governing board packet. It indicates the membership is 10,094. That was true for 22-23, but for last year and this year, it's 9,579 because our enrollment has declined, and so we fall into a different band for the membership amount, so it's a little less than what's reflected in the governing board packet. But GUPPY-MAC has 63 member districts from all over the state. We have a superintendent's division, a curriculum division, and a business officials division, and it's an opportunity for us to come together as public educators to learn from one another, share best practices, and identify ways that we can elevate excellence and promote public education. And so we recently had a subcommittee that developed a recommendation with respect to school safety and security that's been presented to elected officials. We had another subcommittee that's worked on the narrative around public education, and we've got an event and a convening planned in August of next year. And so the benefit to the district accrues in many different ways, and at $9,500, it's a pretty small expenditure to continue participating in that group.
Do you want to have a discussion first? All right. Ms. Carney?
Yes, while it might seem like a small expenditure, I was a no on this vote last year for this exact reason, because we have to be fiscally responsible, and you know, these numbers do add up. These two contracts that I brought are almost $50,000 a year. And when we're talking about, oh, where can we find $300,000? I think we could very easily find $300,000 if we would actually get serious, though, and look at so many of these contracts that we have. And I just brought these forward as a couple examples of not necessary spending. Like I said, policy DB says that superintendent is directed to formulate the annual budget, considering at all times that resources must be used to produce the most positive effect on the student's opportunity to gain an education, which these things have really very little to do with. And I just think we've got to look for ways to tighten the reins on the M&O spending if we're serious as a board about trying to keep, you know, our assistant principals, which is what our community wants. So I would appreciate others that have other ideas too of how they could cut spending. But for now, I will make a motion to cancel the contract with GUPPY-MAC as stated in the contract that we are allowed to do if we are in fiscal reduction 90 days in advance. And so I make a motion that we cancel this contract and put this money toward our school site spending.
And I second that motion. I also was a no vote on this because I do believe that it's all these extra expenditures do add up to a lot that can go back to our sites, and this really is a luxury. And I understand you're heavily involved with the organization, but we need you heavily involved here at our school sites, and it's just what's important. So I'm not going to support it again this year, and with that, I second this motion.
Thank you. Dr. Potensky?
So I respectfully disagree for the same reasons as the last one. I think of myself as someone who's very serious about kind of resetting our cost structure. I feel bad that we're almost always talking in a negative context. We have a vibrant, wonderful district. We have 19,000 students, amazing teachers, compared to a whole lot of districts. If all they ever knew is what we are today, we are, have so much to be excited and proud of. At the same time, we once were a different size, and so we're kind of chasing ourselves to a new normal, and hopefully we are getting to a point demographically and competitively where we hit that new normal. I think it's clear we need to do a major restructuring of our expenses and reset to that new normal. My concern here is the board selecting specific expenses, and because we could have an agenda that has 30 things, and I just don't see that as the role of the board. I think it is the role of the board to make very clear that we need to push harder to find savings And you may come back to us with these kinds of decisions, but I don't see it as the role of the board to start selectively, what about this, what about this, what about this? Because I just think it's a bad precedent, and I don't know where it ends.
Ms. Warner?
I would actually disagree with you respectfully. It is the role of the board because we are the ones who decide the budget. We vote on the budget, and as Dr. Menzel said earlier, we voted for this, and you will hear all the time, you voted for this, the board decided. And when you look at Isaac, that board also decided, and they ended up in a pretty bad shape. And so it is the role of the board to do this. And I will also add, the conflict is that the same lobbyist for State 48 is the same one for Guppy Mac. And so it's like a double dip, and it makes no sense. And when we are if we were flourishing and we were, the district was growing, our staff was happy and enrollment was growing, absolutely, but we're not, and our staff is suffering, and we hear from them every single day, and it is time to redirect our funds to take care of our staff, who ultimately take care of our students.
Ms. Carney?
Thank you. Just to your point, Board Member Patinsky, I did ask from the dais last meeting and by email as well for Dr. Menzel to provide us a report with where he could cut and where he has cut and where he can cut, and we have not received that. So therefore, I'm left with no choice but to try and come up with options for us to save money that we can put toward assistant principals, because I believe that is a priority we have. And so I'm left with no option when you're asking for something and not receiving it.
Any other board comments or questions?
I would just say, I feel like we got some of that answer in the presentation when it comes to the positions. For example, the 16 positions that were eliminated at the district office. I would agree it didn't go deep enough in order to address the priority that you've articulated, which I happen to share, around the assistant principal. So I agree with that. But I think what I heard in that presentation was a series, there was a slide that listed the different cuts that are being made.
Correct, and that was positions, and that was not directly from Dr. Menzel, was asked to be provided to the board. But it's fine, I'm just saying, I would rather not be doing this as well. But I've been on the board longer, I've got more experience with, where money's going, and so it's my attempt to try and help find that money, and that's all that my intention is. So, thank you.
Mr. Sharkey?
And I appreciate that effort. Seconding what Mr. Patinsky said, I would rather go back and say, give us an option of offsetting the 305,000. Give us the deep cut and which sounds like what you asked for and didn't get, and appreciate that. Rather than us being very prescriptive about what those are. Just because, from my standpoint, you have more experience, but we don't work in the district day to day. And so it's hard for us to understand the impact of cutting this and cutting this because we don't feel the pain of it. And people are going to feel pain. I would rather have them understand, hey, of these bad options, here's the least bad one that I'll take, because I can't see us making that because we don't feel it. So I would rather go back that and say, here's what we would like, give us a cut to the bone option, and then have it come back, as opposed to us saying, we want you to cut A, B, C, and D.
Perfect, then you asked for it, maybe we'll get it, thank you.
All right, we have a motion on the table to give 90-day notice and stop the Greater Phoenix Guppy Mac intergovernmental agreement for 23-28, and we had a second. Are there any other comments? All right, I'm going to call for a roll call vote. Dr. Patinsky?
Nay.
Karen?
Aye.
Amy?
Aye.
Mike?
Nay.
And nay. Thank you. All right, we are now at approval of memorandum of understanding with Grand Canyon Education and Grand Canyon University regarding pathway programs.
So this is a really small pilot project, but because it's an agreement with Grand Canyon University and they are proposing to provide scholarships for students selected to participate, they had requested a memorandum of understanding to memorialize what they're going to bring to the table and what we're going to try to do. Long story short is this is an intent to identify aspiring teachers that are current high school students, provide dual enrollment opportunities for them while they're in school, seamless transition into Grand Canyon, go through the teacher prep program with the ultimate objective to being hired back in the school district where they got their high school diploma. So there's very small potential costs for the district. There might be some paid internship opportunities when they're going through their pre-service teaching program at Grand Canyon University, but the university itself is going to look at the scholarshiping for the credits that they earn, and we would recommend that the board approve this pilot project. We're one of 3 in the valley that are taking this plunge, and we'll learn from it. We'll see if it works or doesn't work, but we do have a commitment to try to attract and retain talent, and we have many, many of our employees already. You might remember on our opening day rallies, the number of people who were educated in our system, who've come back to teach in our system, who have kids in our system. It is a strength of Scottsdale, and we'd like to continue that.
Questions? Comments? All right, I make a motion to approve the MOU with Grand Canyon Education and Grand Canyon University regarding the Pathways Program as presented.
I'll second.
Thank you, Dr. Potensky. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes 5-0. All right, we are at 8I, approval of the 25-26 Governing Board meetings calendar. What questions, if any? Dr. Potensky?
So what I would ask, I think there's 2 distinct questions. One is, how many meetings do we want to have? Do we want to have 2 or 1? Then there's the separate question of this very specific dates. I have a few conflicts on those dates. So if it's reasonable to ask, I might ask for us to decide more on the structure and then give us a little bit of an opportunity, maybe others want to do this too, weigh in on the specific dates just in case other people have conflicts. So can we decide on option A or B in terms of the frequency of meetings, but not the very, very specific meeting dates?
If we did that, what we would do is go back and revise the proposed calendar and test whether or not there were other known conflicts to make sure that when we finalize the dates for next year, that we, at least at that time, have confidence that we'll have the majority of the board present. We recognize that life happens and sometimes there might be a conflict that surfaces later, but we could make a good faith effort. I do think it's fair to identify the cadence of meeting, whether it's option A or B, and then we can revise further and adopt it at our May 13th meeting.
Thank you.
Are we proposing to table this until another time? I'm sorry, okay, Mrs. Carney?
Thank you. So I'd like to make a motion to approve option A, which is keeping a similar schedule to what we've had the past 2 years. As I voiced last year, I feel this schedule works better for our staff and gives more time for everyone to prepare between meetings.
Second.
Any other comments? Dr. Potensky?
Well, I guess, can we approve option A, but leaving open the very specific date choices to give ourselves an opportunity to weigh in?
Didn't you say no?
No,
No, I think you said we could.
No, we can do that. So if you say 11 regular and 5 special, we'll take the draft that we have now, see if there are any other known conflicts, and then we'll see, how in terms of the cadence, what might work for all 5.
Yeah, and if it's an impossible thing to solve, I understand, but
Sorry, we've just not done that before, so I thought we would approve it and then change like we
Yeah,
normally do.
yeah, we have time to do this on the front end so that when we approve it, we can hopefully have confidence that those dates will work.
but I also support option A, I should say.
There's a motion on the table to pass the calendar,
Option A.
option A,
And there's a second.
and there's a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It passes 5-0. Are you clear? Are you okay with that? Okay, good. All right, thank you. I want to thank everybody for being here this evening. We're going to seek a vote, and I'll be making a motion to go into executive session. We will come back after we adjourn executive session pursuant to ARS 38-43103A3 and A4 for the purpose of attaining legal advice and providing direction to the attorney for the public body regarding resolution of litigation against Total Energies Distributed Generation USA LLC. I move to adjourn into executive session.
Second the motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
No.
So, Ms. Warner, were you a yes? Aye. So it passes 4-1. All right, we will move into executive session, and we will be back shortly. Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.
But I did want to ask that we ideally cover some amount of enrollment within the study session.
All right, thank you. Mr. Sharkey? Okay, I have 2 items I'm going to potentially bring up. In the next 4 or 5 months, it's not coming up fast. I would like to talk about our music program and just get an understanding of where we are in our music program, specifically pre-K through 12, and in terms of band and strings, what our history has been, what our instrumental access is for our students, and maybe what music scholarships our students earn. And this is not anything that has to happen immediately. I'd like to talk about it over the next 4 or 5 months. And then I'd like to add financial preparation for our students and ask about any financial math programs that we have relative to economics or business through the DECA programs, or what we offer kids besides learning nickel, dime, coin in their younger years. So just begin to think about financial mathematics, time management, learning about interest, paying taxes, that kind of thing. So I'd like to learn a little more about that and consider proposing some of that for our students so it's relevant. Oh, shoot. Dates of upcoming meetings. Next meeting is April 21st at 5. Governing Board Retreat, yay. Innovation Center at Saguaro High School. And then April 29th, we have our special Governing Board meeting, which, as Mr. Potensky, Dr. Potensky has said, he hopes is a real study session. All right, I move to adjourn. Do we do that? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, good night, everybody.
Thank you all.